You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show across those divided states, covering news and politics and more. In the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, getting into the headlines this morning. First up in COVID news, the U.S. reported its highest daily COVID-19 death count ever Tuesday. More than 3,770 American deaths were reported in one day, more than 24 above the country's previous record set less than a week ago. The country also topped 21 million infections Tuesday and set a hospitalization record with more than 131,100 COVID-19 hospitalized patients nationwide. As a result, governors plan on distributing vaccines faster by mobilizing National Guard members and training more volunteers to administer vaccines. Earlier Tuesday, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data showed 17 million doses had been distributed and more than 4.8 million had been administered. That means only about 28% of the distributed doses have been administered. I've got to say that's slower, much slower than I'd like, but I was looking into this. We're like fourth internationally in terms of our per capita COVID vaccination rate. Israel is far and above everybody else. And I'm forgetting who's in second. I think the United Kingdom was in third, just ahead of us, and then we're in fourth. Having said that, we also, have a pretty damn high per capita death rate. So we're on the polls at both ends of this thing, and the hope would be that we would be, with our exceptionalist rhetoric, that we would be ahead of the pack. I don't know, Jamarl, what's your take?
It seems like some of the policies that they're putting in place may lose the vaccines. I mean, look, from my standpoint, you should be vaccinating as many people as possible, and more importantly, people who are on the front lines, meaning those people at those checkout counters, those people that you kept calling heroes, because they had to be out there working, putting their lives on the line for COVID, making the $18,000 a year. Yeah, those people are heroes, and those people should be vaccinated first. And there's no excuse for the vaccines to go bad. There's just not. If there's a person there that can take that vaccine, rather than that vaccine going bad, you give it to the person. It's bad enough that we do that to food, or we spoil food. I think like half of the food in the country gets thrown away or something, some ungodly number. Well, we shouldn't do that to a vaccine if there are people out there who want to take it. So, yeah, it's sad. Basically, the country that's worst in dealing with the COVID-19 is also pretty bad at putting out the vaccine. Not good.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. All right, the World Health Organization has said that China has blocked the arrival of a team sent there investigating the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said two scientists on the United Nations team had already left their home countries for Wuhan when they were told the Chinese officials had not approved the necessary permissions to enter the country. The agreements had been jointly agreed with China in advance. There's a chance that this is just a sort of small clerical matter, that some forms that were supposed to be filled out in certain ways weren't, or that something that was due wasn't submitted, that kind of thing, or there's something deeper going on here. Anyway, in national political news, Democrat Raphael Warnock was declared the victor in one of Georgia's two Senate runoff elections, defeating incumbent Senator Kelly Loeffler. Warnock, a pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church where Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once preached, became the first black man elected to represent Georgia in the Senate. Hours before it was officially called, Warnock declared victory in a virtual address to supporters. Loeffler, meanwhile, did not concede in her own speech late Tuesday night. She said, quote, "We got some work to do here. This is a game of inches. We're going to win this election. We're going to save this country," end quote. The margins were kind of big. just put it that way. Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff, meanwhile, is leading GOP Senator David Perdue, 50.2% to Purdue's 49.8%. 98% reporting. That is definitely leaning in Jon Ossoff's favor, but that's a very tight margin. Jamarl, are you going to claim victory, or do you think it would be premature at this point to do so?
I claimed victory months ago, but nobody believed me, and we needed to have the election. They could have just taken my word for it. They didn't even need to have the election. I'm claiming victory. Nobody believed me on this, and I don't know why people didn't believe me on this. How do you have a president that has 400,000 people dead, and that president win? I just couldn't conceive it. That's why I thought Biden was going to take the presidency. From the standpoint of the House, my thought was, if Biden wins the presidency, how do they not retain the House? Like, the Senate was always a toss-up to me. Those two were pretty clear. The Senate was always in question because the Senate needed a little bit more of a hurdle. But, well, this hurdle was just seemed to be overcome in one place. You have one more race that needs to be won for me to be right on this. And then the question becomes, then what? What are the expectations if Democrats take the Senate and the House and the presidency? And more importantly, do you think Biden is going to live up to those assumptions, those expectations, whatever those expectations are? I think this is a fascinating result. And that's why I kept asking, do people really believe that Biden wants to take the Senate? I understand it gives him more leeway, but if you're not going to use that leeway, what's the point in having it? So I am going to wait to claim my victory until after the last race, when Ossoff wins. But I'm one step there. Warnock is taking it.
And if Ossoff has a small margin at this point, he could be taking it. It's not, as far as I can tell, it's not so close that they would have to call for a recount, although many surely would, especially given what Trump has been doing. Another side of this whole process, though, I mean, two things I'll add in here. One, I'm genuinely not sure that Hillary would have done better. In fact, when it comes to the money given out, I certainly don't think she would have. When it comes to reducing the number of deaths, I think it's a toss-up, honestly. That's point one. And then point two, what do you think if after Trump's first term, Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, what do you think that does to, like, Trumpism and the sort of Republican populist movement that has sprung up over the past, say, half decade? Jamarl, what's your opinion?
It emboldens it, depending on what Democrats do. Like, if Democrats come out, let's say they get them small margins, and they make the choice to say, you know what, we're going to get rid of the filibuster, and we're going to try to knock this out of the park. The Trump stuff and the populism stuff isn't going anywhere. So on the Republican side, you will get Trump still screaming bloody murder on the sidelines, talking about the race was stolen and all this other stuff. But the catch becomes Democrats. I honestly do believe it boils down to what they do. The populism stuff, you have no control over populism on the Republican side because those people aren't going to vote for you anyway. What you do have control over is whether or not you can appease the public to ensure that those people don't get back in power. That's all you have the power to do from the standpoint of Biden. If you can deliver, if you can knock it out of the park, if you can get people to say, okay, fair enough, I was able to get X, Y, Z under a Biden presidency, so I'm going to put him in, or whoever else in, for a second term. That is vitally important. Because I think the Trump movement is going to still grow and be a thing unto itself outside of the Republican Party. Meaning, even though Trump might be out of it, that is not going anywhere. At least I don't believe it's going anywhere any more than I thought the Tea Party was going anywhere in that short time period. But what it really does boil down to is what Democrats do within this lead. Are they going to articulate the political apparatus in a way that delivers, since they have both houses? Because the key here is America is going to walk away saying, well, Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. What's your excuse? They're not going to have one. So my advice would be they better deliver something. Otherwise, they will be punished in the next 2 years.
I think it'll significantly affect it. I don't know if it's going to reduce the size of Trumpism, or I don't think it's going to reduce the extent to which people try to follow Trump if they can on certain social media networks, because there's always the possibility that he gets blocked or banned or pushed off Twitter, and more. But Republicans, party Republicans, are almost certainly going to look at this as a long-term failure if this is the result of Trump's first term and apparently only term. And they're probably going to try to change course in a few ways. Now, again, we're talking about populism here. A lot of the politics is going to take place outside of the halls of Congress and the White House and stuff, but I think that holds true regardless. Anyway, back into the headlines here. President Trump claimed in a statement on Tuesday night he and Vice President Mike Pence are in quote-unquote total agreement on the vice president's authority regarding the Electoral College count after multiple news outlets reported Pence told Trump he lacks the power to alter the election results. Trump's statement said, quote, "The New York Times report regarding comments Vice President Pence supposedly made to me today is fake news. He never said that. The Vice President and I are in total agreement that the Vice President has the power to act. Our Vice President has several options under the U.S. Constitution. He can decertify the results or send them back to the states for change and certification. He can also decertify the illegal and corrupt results and then send them to the House of Representatives for the one vote for one state tabulation," end quote. There will be at least 12 Republican senators and dozens of Republicans in the House of Representatives objecting to the Electoral College results today, potentially pushing the proceedings into Thursday, tomorrow. We'll come back on that tomorrow, of course. Tuesday in Wisconsin, Kenosha County District Attorney Michael Gravely announced that Rustin Shesky, the white officer who shot Jacob Blake 7 times, will not face charges. Protesters showed up to the Kenosha County Administration Building, and Blake's family said they will be taking the fight to Congress. Internationally, a British judge is set to decide today whether WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will be released from the prison where he has been held for more than a year and a half as he fights extradition to the United States. Our 7:30 guest, by the way, editor-in-chief of the Duran, Alexander Mercouris, will be coming to talk to us about that. He'll be giving us his info on that.
Shane, just to interrupt that for a moment. The judge has refused to grant asylum, Assange bail. I've been following the case this morning, and one of the people who were there, Mohammed El Mazai, was basically have a Twitter thread on this, but at the end of the thread, judge refuses to grant Assange bail. The conditions in Belmarsh prison are nowhere near as what they are in the United States that led the judge to refusing to grant the extradition order. As far as Mr. Assange is concerned, this case has not yet been won, quote unquote, the judge says. The outcome of the U.S. government's appeal is, quote, not yet known, unquote. Judge Barrister says, arguing that Assange, quote, still has an incentive to abscond, unquote. The U.S. must be allowed to appeal. So that's what we're going with that.
But denying bail basically until the U.S. fails at its appeal, if it does. And then I also see there's a subnote to our headline that I should refer to you to discuss a Gray Zone article. You have some comments on this one?
Well, the Gray Zone article is just basically talking about CNN, that the judge was using a CNN report that basically Assange was trying to work with the Russians to escape, something to that effect. Like, because if you remember, all of this reports started coming out, all of these leaks. Assange was talking about working with the Russians in order to blow through the embassy and to get out and to escape, like all of this type of stuff. And it's basically using that as a basis for logic, meaning she's using that as a primary to build upon her thoughts, missing the point that the CNN's articles on this stuff weren't necessarily true. So the Gray Zone has just been really good at covering a lot of the stuff, especially the leaks, the leaks dealing with the OPCW, all that stuff. So Gray Zone has been on point. But they ran this article this morning, just making mention to that. So let's do this. Let's take a break. We only have about a minute. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You guys, so let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with Alexander Mercouris. Love talking to him from the Duran. Back shortly.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I know I say Alexander McCurse, but I made a mistake. I just meant the soapbox segment. So, yesterday, or let's say months ago, my prediction was that Democrats retain the House, Democrats take the Senate, and Democrats win the presidency. Now, again, the reason I thought that is because I could not conceive of a world where a president loses nearly 400,000 Americans. They just drop dead based on his own malfeasance, where you have 30 million Americans lose their job, and that president wins. Now, what I didn't foresee, and what I didn't necessarily quite get, is that the American public was so beaten down and battered, so used to not getting anything, that the modest adjustments that were made to the social safety net was in and of itself sufficient for them to give Donald Trump credit for doing it. Think about that. The other countries around the world, Western countries that don't have as near the financial base of the United States, was getting like $2,000 a month, was getting stipends, was giving benefits and health care issues and benefits. Not here. The basic, modest protections that were put out from the standpoint of the PPP loans. Again, the overwhelming majority of those went to big business in the top 1% instead of going to the small businesses to keep them afloat. The modest amount of money that was going to worker benefits. And keep in mind, there were some people who never got that money, who never even got the $1,200 check that was put out. And so when they saw Donald Trump, they looked at it and said, hey, the president was trying to help. And so they didn't necessarily punish him in the way that I thought he would be punished for the loss of life. That in and of itself is a condemnation of what we've done in this country over the course of the last 40 years. Well, the American public will look at nothing and consider it to be something. That's sad. The catch becomes, now what? Joe Biden has won the race. The Democratic Party has retained the House. And it seems like, based upon the election last night, the Democrats are also going to take the Senate with the vote, the deal breaker vote of Kamala Harris, or let's say the ending vote, or the vote that determines it all, being by Kamala Harris. Meaning, most likely, Mitch McConnell is now the minority leader, and Chuck Schumer, the majority. Let's play the clip of Warnock. Warnock basically understood last night that he won. Let's play this clip. We haven't. Yeah.
We were told that we couldn't win this election. But tonight, we proved that with hope, hard work, and the people by our side, anything is possible. And so, Georgia, I am honored by the faith that you have shown in me. And I promise you this tonight. I am going to the Senate to work for all of Georgia. No matter who you cast your vote for in this election, in this moment in American history, Washington has a choice to make. In fact, all of us have a choice to make. Will we continue to divide, distract, and dishonor one another? Or will we love our neighbors as we love ourselves? Will we play political games while real people suffer? Or will we win righteous fights together, standing shoulder to shoulder, for the good of Georgia, for the good of our country? Let us rise up, greet the morning, and meet the challenges of this moment. Together we can do the necessary work and win the future for all of our children. Thank you. God.
We will win the future or we will perish together. That's the way I see it. Warnock wasn't supposed to win this. If you remember, what were you told? That Democrats don't win Georgia runoffs. That those things, for the most part, just goes to Republicans almost automatically. But what did I say? I say, when was the last time a Democrat won Georgia from the standpoint of the presidency? Meaning you were in a new world. The interesting thing that I want to talk about for this election, though, is I want to point something out that I've made the point over and over and over again that I deem to be true, that I think this election also backs up the logic of it. When I make the point that politicians dwell in brinksmanship, and I point to Boris Johnson in the UK and the way that I'd be dead in a ditch, he wasn't dead in a ditch. But I also point to people like Biden who would basically say, go vote for the other guy. Now the question is, how far does that go? Clearly, Joe Biden wants to get elected. And clearly, you can't get elected by having people vote for the other person. You can tell that person that if you believe that person has nowhere else to go, and that person is stuck with you, where you have the clout to basically say, I have so many people voting for me. Those people are so desperate. They have nowhere else to go. So I can tell you that if you want climate change, if you want racial justice, if you want the notion of immigration policy, go vote for the other guy. I'm good with my base of unconditional support that also wants those things, but in no way is going to actually push for those things. The thing that you need to pay attention to is the $2,000. Does the American public want $2,000? By 70, 80%, that answer is yes. Does the Republican Party want to give the $2,000? The answer is no. Does the Democratic Party want to give the $2,000? That answer is also no. Joe Biden was the one that contacted the House Democrats to tell them, hey, less is okay. Even though Nancy Pelosi was out of place, or just out of sorts, on the Wolf Blitzer's interview, talking about 1.8 trillion is insufficient. Well, you could accept half of that now. I'm okay with that. In which case, Nancy Pelosi goes back on Wolf Blitzer looking crazy, saying the exact opposite of what she was saying before, repudiating her previous position to accept less. Well, Joe Biden comes out and says, put me in, get to 2,000. Whoa, that's interesting. This guy that's not for 2,000 is now telling people, put me in, you get to 2,000. You have Loeffler and Perdue, who under no circumstances will be for 2,000. The last week, telling people, hey, 2,000. Just said it in whisper. Because in no real way do they believe it. But why are they even whispering this? Why is even Joe Biden saying something about this? Think to yourself, why? Why? Is it weird and bizarre that the American public that has been beaten down by coronavirus, that was beaten down by a housing crisis, that was abandoned for months, that Pelosi dithered while businesses went up in smoke and Americans died? When all of this stuff was taking place, you don't believe that the American public wants, needs that extra money, those extra benefits? Of course they do. Of course they're going to be on board for getting $2,000. And the trick and the catch is, politicians know it. Why wouldn't politicians know it? This brinksmanship of go vote for the other guy, that only goes but so far, and that only goes that route because he believes that you in no way are going to do just that. I'm making a point that influence matters, that what you give to the electorate matters, and what that electorate believes you're going to give to them matters. It is the reason that Chuck Schumer kept throwing out the $50,000 in paying off student loans, because he wanted Joe Biden to pick it up, because he wanted to be Speaker of the House, and he understood that giving away things offering things, especially to a public that was beaten down, a public that has been basically ignored during a pandemic and during a crisis larger than the Great Depression, that public would agree with and accrue around the people who are looking out for his interests. $50,000 in elimination of student debt is looking out for his interests. The healthcare is looking out for his interests. And yes, $2,000 as a bribe of sorts is looking out for his interests. It's the reason why those Republicans all of a sudden came around Loeffler and Perdue, because they understood that it's what the public wanted and it's what the public needed. It's the reason that Joe Biden came around to it. None of these people agree with the policy is the point that I'm trying to make to you, and yet the political force of trying to get elected, the leverage of it, mattered so much that they would stick their toe in the pool of public want. I'm just trying to make the point to you, very importantly, that when I argue that leverage matters, and the leverage of whether or not the individual is going to get into office or not matters the most. When I'm making the point to you that pushing for Medicare for all with the demand of you will lose without it because you have 30 million people matters, regardless of how much they try to downplay the external aspects of politics. They try to downplay this notion of the public. They hate this idea of populism, but they hate the idea of populism because it demands real gains. It makes real gains. When you have those politicians out there who in no way agree with giving that money back, tepidly giving the money, yes, they're probably lying about it. But they're lying about it because they're trying to get votes because they want to get in office. When I look at the left and I make the point to you that with 70% or 74% support of Medicare for all, 88%, that commands power. But it only commands power if you're willing to use it. African Americans have been hit greatly by COVID-19. You also voted for Biden to the tune of like 90%. Do you not want anything for that support? Do you not think things should be demanded for that support? And what are your demands? Do you want to ensure that all of the people that have been hit so hard with COVID have their bills covered? You know, like a Medicare for all with COVID? Then demand that. Why wouldn't you demand that? Joe Biden was infinitely relying upon you to get in office. Why wouldn't you have demands associated with that? Why would that support be unconditional? And yeah, for the 2000, I'm making the point to you that when the politician wants to get in office, leverage is commanded by the people who are willing to let him or her fail. This Georgia election was an extremely good example in the way that politicians started to crew around a particular policy that they didn't all that much agree with because they wanted to get elected. That gives credence to this notion of pushing hard on Medicare for all or pushing hard, using the leverage of their ability to get in office or using their ability to get in office and the potential for their loss as leverage. It shows itself in the $2,000. When I'm making this case because it makes all the sense in the world that if a politician wants to get in office, what you hold up is that it's not unconditional, that you do make them do their jobs. And in that very specific case, doing their jobs is representing things that is in the best interest of the American public and is a release valve to the capitalistic system. If nothing else, this is proof of concept. Shane, what do you think? The $2,000 was something that they all of a sudden put up and people started whispering about and the various places started whispering about. Well, they started whispering about it for obvious reasons. The American public wanted it. And if you back that policy, you will be more likely to get the American public to vote for you. That seems like basic politics. And yet, that's the politics that it seems that the Democratic Party often eschews. What do you think?
I think they should have done it, and they should have done more. We've talked about this before. Yeah, when we had Mark Frost on, I thought he did a good job of presenting a new and pretty representative view, which is the government effectively took work opportunities away from people by forcing them to stay at home. That's probably a good thing because we have a pandemic going on. But now it should be paying them money in exchange for restricting their ability to work. And $2,000 is not nearly equivalent to the amount of money they would have made if they'd been able to work over the vast majority of the past year. So, yeah, I think if you put it in those terms, there's like a moral thing here. There's a moral dynamic here. And honestly, that's probably one of the better arguments for it. It's not just a moral argument. It is a moral argument, but it's a sort of moral argument about not just responsibility, but culpability. And that the government was culpable in restricting the economic potential of a lot of people, and potentially, not just potentially, putting a lot of small businesses out of work, and putting a lot of people who don't own a business, who might never own a business, who are just laboring, cutting them off from saving up money, from doing what they need to support their families, all that stuff. So yeah, you need to make up for that at the very least. Regardless, we're going into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Mercouris. We're joined now by Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief at The Duran, which you should go check out at theduran.com. You can also find them on YouTube and on Twitter. Alexander, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm very well, and my pleasure speaking to you again.
A pleasure, I'm sure, that is heightened by the events of the past couple of days, which is specifically what we're talking about. Assange not being extradited. The Judge Vanessa Barrett's are deciding against extradition to the United States. Of course, the U.S. is appealing. This morning, his bail was denied, so this process is still ongoing. But I would see this as a victory, despite the somewhat bizarre, specifics, the details of why she chose to deny that extradition. Alexander, what's your take?
Well, it is a victory for him. It's also a problematic decision for press freedom. And I think we need to say that because Judge Baritza went out of her way in the judgment she gave on Monday to say that all the various points that the U.S. government had taken, all the reasons it had given for wanting to extradite him were valid. And she went through all the arguments very quickly and very briefly and without, by the way, addressing the expert evidence at all. But she nonetheless decided that he should be extradited on those bases, but he won't be extradited because of the terrible nature of the U.S. prison system and because he's got mental issues. She considers him autistic and a high suicide risk, and she doesn't think that the U.S. justice system is able to protect him. So it means that if you are a journalist doing the sort of things that Assange did, in other words, engaging in investigative journalism, which might involve, for example, getting close to whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning, who carry out computer thefts from, computer files, then that might expose you in future, unless you have mental health issues, to extradition to the United States. And she not only said that, but she also said that if you did that sort of thing in Britain and released British classified data, you could be prosecuted under the British Official Secrets Act. So, a very bad result for press freedom, a very good result for Julian Assange. At a human level, one is pleased for him. At a journalistic level, one is worried. And I'm afraid the bail hearing this morning was botched because of some, I thought, unforced errors by the defense, one by the defense team, one by the Mexican president, which meant that a bail outcome, which should have been favorable, went wrong.
Yeah, because the judge was basically trying to say that he still had the potential to, quote unquote, abscond. The Mexican president comes out yesterday and basically says, hey, you can get asylum here. Mexico has a history of standing by countries, especially for this notion of asylum. And there's something else about this, too, that I think people sometimes forget when Carrera issued the asylum for Julian Assange. This notion of sovereignty and the way that the South has basically been denied that sovereignty by imperialistic policy. And I'm saying this, the running roughshod over the various governments of South America under the Monroe Doctrine. Well, if you have this notion that we're a sovereign country just like every other sovereign country, they issue autonomy. They basically allow him to come in for asylum because they understood that they themselves have every right, just like any other government, to issue asylum. They're a real country, and as such, they can do so. So I think you're talking about, just from the judge's perspective, making it look as if, well, Assange could skip bail tomorrow, end up in Mexico, we can't get our hands on him again. That's the unforced error you're talking about, right?
Exactly. There were two unforced errors. Firstly, I think the way in which the Mexican president made that comment on Monday, and by the way, he had every right to say that. Mexico has every right to grant asylum. But to do that on the eve of the bail hearing, given the history of this case, and given the attitude the British authorities and the British judiciary have taken to Ecuador's previous grant of asylum, was, to put it mildly, extremely unwise and very unhelpful to Assange himself. And I think there was another mistake that was made, by the way, which was probably by his legal team at Assange's own instigation, which is that they made a major issue about the fact that there is COVID spreading in Belmarsh prison. The judge has already refused bail on that basis. And I think to revisit that issue again and to provide statistics about the amount of COVID in Belmarsh, which it turned out was wrong, was a mistake also. And when the judge pressed the defense lawyers as to where they were getting these bad statistics from, it turned out that they were coming from Assange. And I think that was really unfortunate. It made, I think, the judge feel that Assange is completely unreconciled to things, and it made him look manipulative, which is really unfortunate. I'm going to say this straightforwardly. If Assange, just for once, had been prepared to behave like a conventional defendant, come along to the judge, say through his lawyers that he deeply regretted what had happened before with the flight to the Ecuadorian embassy, and that he has now got a family to go to, and that he understands and respects the decisions of the British court, I don't think he would have had any problem getting bail this morning. But of course, Assange is not a conventional defendant. He will never accept that these decisions were wrong. He doesn't have to personally accept them, but just for the purpose of getting bail, he could have said that. But of course, he didn't. And the result is the judge turned against him and refused him bail, even though what it means is that she's refused him bail after having discharged him on Monday, which on the face of it is completely illogical. But it shows, I'm afraid, both the hostility to him, the continued hostility to him of the British judiciary and of the British state on the one hand, and on the fact, which I have to say this, and I've heard this from many people, he is not the easiest person to help. He often insists on taking lines of defense which turn out wrong, and I think he did so this morning.
This is also those, again, not to push back on you on this, but just to add another, he's been in captivity for years. His mental health has reportedly been declining, not just depression, but serious potential for physical illness. And then there's just the isolation that, I would assume aggravate everything I was just saying there. What's your take on that? Is that any explanation? not to try to fully, because like you're saying, I have heard the same. He can be difficult to work with when it comes to some of this stuff, and he's a hardliner ideologically, I think, not, Anyway, Alexander, what's your take?
No, I think that's entirely right. I think what has happened is that this appalling treatment that he has been experiencing, and which he is continuing to experience in Belmarsh, has hardened his tendency, which the judge accepted and discussed at length in her judgment on Monday, to take very strong positions, which he is very, very unwilling. In fact, he simply will not be persuaded to shift from, even when it's in his own interests, legally speaking, to do that. Now, I think the judge should certainly have taken that into account when assessing the bail application this morning. And to be absolutely realistic about it, a London in lockdown, which is what we have at the moment, I think there is no prospect of Assange escaping to the Mexican embassy. And she talked about his huge networks, which would help him. I am sure that most of the people in those networks would strongly advise Assange against fleeing to the Mexican embassy. Why would he want to flee to the Mexican embassy when the court has discharged him and he looks very likely to win the appeal? So I think the judge's fears are groundless. I think she's consistently ignored the effect on Assange's mental health of the way he's been treated by the British authorities. And I think she should have granted him bail this morning, despite, as I said, the fact that his lawyers, undoubtedly on his instructions, took an approach which I think was wrong, and despite the fact that the Mexican president said things which were unhelpful. But there we are. I'm afraid we are where we are. I think I'm right in saying that once the appeal is set down in the High Court, which I expect will be sometime next week, that his lawyers are in a position to renew his bail request to the High Court judge, to a High Court judge next week. The moment it's not before the High Court, so they can't realistically do that. But when it goes to the High Court, they can make an application to the High Court for bail, and I hope that will be decided differently.
I look at this case, and I never considered this a win for press freedom. And yesterday, like I told people, I was somewhat melancholy about the entirety of it because it's such a weird ruling. And I don't know if there are legal reasonings behind the way the judge phrased this ruling. Meaning, if you say that Assange has a mental illness to such a degree that it gives him superpowers to overcome anything that a supermax prison can throw at him, so he'll kill himself, that seems very specific in regards to what's being said. And I don't even entirely buy it, per se. Is the judge just trying to make a point, or is the judge saying this very specific for the next appellate judge to make a choice? Meaning, is this a reasoning that is based in some kind of legalese that we as the public see it as one thing, but another judge, especially from the appellate court, will see it as something else that they can give a determination about true or false, and that will be the final determining factor about whether Assange is extradited or not? Have you heard anybody doing this before, like a judge making this? And one last point. Why do you think they were ever going to let him out? I mean, because you're assuming that the ruling today was based upon the things that the defense said, as opposed to based on just keeping him in jail for the appellate court to perhaps get a second bite at him. Why do you believe that she potentially would have let him out today?
Well, I think that if the thing had been approached in a different way, I think the judge would have found it very difficult to justify keeping him in. If she had refused to give him bail, if there'd not been the statement from Mexico, if there'd not been this attempt to argue the COVID situation, if he'd come as a more contrite defendant, I don't really see what grounds the judge would have had to refuse bail. And I think the judge would probably have granted bail, whatever the political pressures upon her, because if she hadn't granted bail, there would have been a real chance, a real prospect that she would be criticised by the High Court, and potentially, if this went even further, all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights. There is a right to bail. There is a right to freedom, and he has been discharged on Monday.
Even with political prisoners. We have to take a break real quick, but think for a moment. Even with political prisoners, even with the hostility that was directed against Assange in this courtroom and in this case, I mean, for God's sake, he was supposed to be let out, he was supposed to stay in prison for 50 weeks. And when they blew past that schedule. And it just seemed like, at a certain degree, it was just hostility, and it was this kind of political pressure to just keep him in prison. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The voice in your ear is Alexander McCurris, editor-in-chief at The Duran. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out,
we actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us is Alexander McCurris, editor-in-chief at The Duran. We've been discussing the Julian Assange case this morning. The ruling that the judge issued this morning is basically that Assange, despite the extradition being denied, she also denied bail. My question is, was she ever going to allow him out on bail? And your assessment is that she could have. That regardless of the political pressure, that there was also pressure to allow him out because of her ruling that he was basically a mental illness would get him to off himself in an American jail. Explain that for us. You believe that she actually, despite the politics of this, that she would have been criticized by the High Court if she didn't let him out?
She has actually discharged him. There's no actual outstanding sentence in Britain for any offence she's committed. There's not even yet been absolute certainty that there's even going to be an appeal. I mean, we're getting signals from the United States which argue that the US might not want to pursue an appeal. The lead investigator has actually suggested that. So given that all that is the case, it seems very strange that the court would keep in detention someone it has already discharged. It is illogical, but there are very unusual circumstances about this case. Clearly, this is a political prosecution. And clearly, when you are faced with a political prosecution, it's not always easy to know what to do. I do think that he took steps today which were unwise, but, we have to now look forward and deal with that and think of the next hearing. But coming back to the politics of this, and as I said, this is a very political case, it did seem to me, going back to the decision on Monday, that one of the things that Baritza did was that, of course, as the judge, she discharged the case against him on mental health grounds and on the grounds of the American prison system. But at the same time, she made all these decisions which so limit press freedom, both in the United States and in Britain, and do so in ways that are really bad for journalists. And it seems to me that this is a carefully judged decision because, on the one hand, it means that Assange isn't sent to the United States, which would be politically very embarrassing for the British. But at the same time, it gives the Americans, and indeed the British authorities, what they really want out of this case, which is the power going forward to take action against journalists who do the sort of things that Assange did. So we have to think about it in those terms.
So to be clear here, Alexander, what you're saying is they did not want to grant America Assange, but they wanted to act against Assange-like figures, and they set themselves up to do so in the future.
Exactly.
Okay.
Assange is somebody who has become famous internationally. There's a groundswell of support for him in Britain. Sending him to the United States would be politically embarrassing and difficult. And there's been criticism from around the world of the way in which the British authorities have handled every aspect of the case relating to Assange. So don't send him to the US, but give the US everything else it wants so that he can go after people like Assange, or indeed Assange himself in the future, if they do the same sort of things. If they publish information like, the video of the helicopter crew in Iraq killing people, that could land you now in very severe trouble if you follow this judgment.
Alexander, that's disheartening. We only have a few minutes left. I actually want to change topics slightly to a couple other lines of approach. Since we last had you on, I believe Britain has officially signed the deal with the EU. Yeah. We can come back to that in a minute. I actually just want to hear, though, London is in a state of lockdown that I think is unmatched in pretty much any other city in the Western world, as far as I can tell. With this new strain spreading, appears to be a lot more infectious. I'm just curious, what is it like there? What are your thoughts on the lockdown in general? But first of all, what is it like, Alexander?
People are very exhausted. It's the depth of winter. There's very little light because we're very it's a northern country and it's very overcast. And I think the mood generally is very, very grim. People are very exhausted by this, and they're longing for an end to the matter, and they're putting all their hopes on the vaccines. And of course, if you're talking about people who have businesses to run, they're in a terrible situation because they're not getting the kind of financial support they were getting during the lockdowns in the spring and summer. So the mood is very bad. I have to say that compliance and with the lockdown regulations is much weaker than it was in the spring and summer. You see far fewer people wearing masks. You see people much more willing to congregate and meet, and people are simply not observing the rules as they used to do.
Are the rules being enforced in that way? I mean, Bojo seemed like he was pretty serious, or Boris Johnson seemed like he was pretty serious about the rule thing, especially with the numbers. I mean, I was looking at the charts in the UK, and some of the infection chart looks like they were going just straight up at this point. I mean, it was appalling. It seems like he has to do something. I mean, how does the public view that? I know you said they're exhausted, but politically, how do they view it? Do they view it as politically necessary, even though they're exhausted? Or is this problematic for them politically?
I think a lot of people support lockdowns. I think if you look at opinion polls, they support lockdowns, except, of course, that they won't necessarily comply with them, simply because they feel under so much pressure now not to comply with them, and they don't have confidence that the government itself really knows what it's doing. And the same, you see, applies to the police and local authorities and even the courts. Back in the spring and summer, they were taking a rigorous approach to enforcing lockdowns. I think they've now really given up on that because they don't really have any confidence that the policy might not change again tomorrow. And that's the problem. The problem with Boris Johnson is that he changes policy literally from one week to the next. So it's very difficult to know for sure what's going to be the policy next week or in 2 weeks' time or in a month's time. And that means that in a situation where there is a lockdown, people don't really trust either the confidence of the government's policy in pursuing the lockdown or the compliance of all the people around them. And that makes compliance much, much weaker. So there is a sense of drift, there is a sense of depression, there is a sense of the country being both locked down and at the same time cut off from the world and adrift all at the same time. So it's a pretty bad mood.
That sounds like it. Overall, that sounds like it. Let's turn to the trade deal for a second, just very briefly. I want to come, if we have time, to Merkel. I saw you had a video on her and her sort of withdrawal in some sense from public life. But first of all, with the deal that Boris Johnson, the British government, signed with the EU, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think of what happened there, Alexander?
I think that it was very much a deal done between Merkel and Johnson. He cut out the French and he got a free trade deal from the EU, which I think was a lot more than most people had expected he would, actually. So I think from that point of view, he's actually done surprisingly well, all considered. And I think this is something which will probably work to his political advantage over the next few weeks and months. But how long this will continue for is another matter, because it depends very much what the political will in London is. They can take this deal and move forward towards an ever greater Brexit, if you like, or the deal gives them the option to turn around and to reintegrate again, because since they are part of the free trade arrangement with the EU, they remain economically very close to the EU, and they in effect abide by EU regulations and directives. So I described it as leaving the hotel, but keeping the keys in your pocket. So you can go on, you can leave, you've escaped Hotel California, if you like, but you always have the option of going back in.
Well, this has to do with the single market and the rules around it. The thing was always, how did Bojo, or I keep calling him Bojo, but how did Boris Johnson expect to leave the United Kingdom, or let's say expect to leave the European Union, but still keep the business arrangements? Like the single market and the participation in the single market has all sorts of rules associated with it that you would have to abide by if you wanted to, let's say, either sell the meat to the EU, sell products to the EU. How did he expect to square that circle? That seemed to be something that was never going to take place.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, this is the problem with Boris Johnson. I mean, he consistently overpromised, and it's a feature of his political career. He overpromises. He makes things seem.
But the overpromising.
Like we may have.
Well, I was just going to say that overpromising in and of itself is, I mean, it's shown to be successful. I guess what I'm asking, in the next election that's coming around, in fact, maybe we should even talk about Starmer here since we're talking about the UK political space. Does Boris have competition coming up in the next election? And more importantly, between Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn, has the politics of that irreparably damaged the Labour Party for any election in the near future that's coming up?
Yeah, it sounds like he cut out there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what went on.
That's what went on. That's a damn shame.
Yeah,
because we only had a minute left, but it was an interesting conversation. I'm gonna give him the out. I don't think we have enough time to bring him back in.
Yeah.
The voice you were listening to there, Alexander Mercouris. He is the editor-in-chief of The Duran. Check them out at theduran.com. You can follow Alexander's work on Twitter there at theduran_com. Also on The Duran on YouTube. And again, theduran.com. That's their website. And a fascinating conversation. And I wish we'd had time to get to Merkel. One had a video sort of referencing a Bloomberg article from earlier in December, but also his own analysis about how Angela Merkel has effectively withdrawn from public life.
Yeah.
And people are saying that she seems nervous and seems feeble politically in a way that they're not used to seeing from her. Usually she's unflappable, but she is very much flappable right now.
She was in power for like 20 years.
30.
Like, she's a fixture in their politics. And so if Merkel's leaving, what does it mean for the European Union? What does it mean for Germany? Oh man, there's all sorts of questions that comes up. Let's do this. We have to take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with headlines. For real this time.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seasoned political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, the United States reported its highest daily COVID death count ever on Tuesday. More than 3,770 Americans' deaths were reported in one day, more than 24 above the country's previous record, set less than a week ago. The country also topped 21 million infections on Tuesday and set a hospitalization record with more than 131,100 COVID-19 hospitalized patients nationwide. As a result, governors plan on distributing the vaccines faster by mobilizing National Guard members and training more volunteers to administer vaccines. Early Tuesday, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data showed 17 million doses have been distributed and more than 4.8 million have been administered. That means only about 28% of the distributed doses have been administered. That number is so astronomically high. 3,700 people, wow. The World Health Organization said that China blocked the arrival of a team investigating the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. The World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the two scientists on the United Nations team had already left their home countries for Wuhan when they were told that Chinese officials had not approved the necessary permissions to enter the country. The arrangements had been jointly agreed with China in advance. Democrat Raphael Warnock has declared victory in one of Georgia's two Senate runoff elections, defeating incumbent Kelly Loeffler. Warnock, a pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church where Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once preached, became the first black man elected to represent Georgia in the Senate. Hours before it was officially called, Warnock declared victory in a virtual address to supporters. Loeffler, meanwhile, did not concede in her own speech late Tuesday night. Loeffler said, quote, "We got some work to do here. There's a game of inches. We're going to win this election. We're going to save this country," unquote. Democratic candidate John Ossoff is leading GOP Senate Purdue 50.2% to Purdue's 49.8% at 98% reporting. Now, I, who have a tendency to be modest, am not going to say, "I told you so." I'm not going to say that I pointed out that Democrats were going to most likely take the Senate if they kept the House and if they won the presidency. Not going to say it in the least. What I would say is that this poses a question for the Democratic Party, and it poses a question for Joe Biden. You're in the midst of a pandemic. You've had nearly 400,000 people drop dead with over 20 million people infected. This is going to affect businesses, meaning many of those businesses shut up or boarded down, meaning they're closed for good. With those businesses gone, it's going to affect the employees that used to work at those businesses. And beyond affecting the employees, even things like paying rent or even business rents, all of those things get adversely affected and have this kind of downward spiral. The question becomes, what does Joe Biden do? And now that Joe Biden has the House, the Senate, most likely, and the presidency, what is he going to do? Shane, what do you think? Personally, I think if Joe Biden doesn't do something big, he's going to get punished in the next election. And in that next election, if they lose it, just like Obama did, meaning when you didn't use it for the best interest of the public takes it away from you and makes your job that much more harder. I think he gets punished for it. I think Democrats gets punished for it. In fact, I think if Biden doesn't do something big with the numbers that he had, meaning he's been given the House and the Senate, then he or whoever is taking president at that time in 4 years may not even be president. That's what I think. I think this comes with all sorts of consequences, which is kind of why part of me thought maybe he didn't want to take the Senate at all. What do you think? Am I being too harsh on this? And I've had people on who are Democrats who are like, no, he clearly wants the Senate. He clearly wants the Senate. Maybe. But that comes with all sorts of consequences if you don't use that Senate in a way that is in the best interest of the American public. And the fact that the $2,000 was kind of being floated to people gets across that they understand this relationship between promising and getting votes for the things that you promise. What do you think about it?
But is $2,000 big? I don't want to get caught up on this.
Well,
because you mentioned it at the end.
The overwhelming majority of the country works paycheck to paycheck. The overwhelming majority of the country don't have $500 in the bank. I'm talking about like 60% or more of the country. So if you
but I think a lot of people.
If you were in a bad spot, $2,000 is a big deal. I'm telling you, when we were growing up, $100 would have been a big deal. There have been trips.
100%. No, that's chunky. Yes, same with me. Growing up, poor family, for the most part. So yeah, no, that's definitely a sizable amount of money. But the thing is, that's been on the line. That's been promised for months and months and months, and delayed for months and months and months. And I don't think that seems that big anymore. I think that it seems like a little too late for a lot of people. And so more money would probably help. I don't think the $2,000 is big. I think that Mark Frost was onto something when he was talking in the tens of thousands of dollars range. My personal opinion, that should be targeted more than a simple income limit, like some kind of means adjustment process going on there. But that's getting into the weeds of this a little bit. It's not what you were asking about.
But it is means adjusted. I think that's the other part. McConnell was making this argument like this is socialism for the rich. It's like, are you serious? Like McConnell will make that argument. McConnell has even made arguments talking about Obamacare, like it doesn't even cover everybody. Oh, so if it did, Mitch, you'd back it? Well, it is means adjusted. It's like what is it like $75,000 and below or something to that effect, or $100,000 and above gets nothing. So it is means adjusted. So it's not like that's what I mean. They were having this argument seem so ludicrous in Congress.
No, I hear you, but if you look, here's the thing, and this is nothing to like really complain about too deeply, but look, if the point of this thing is not just to save people's lives, but to stimulate the economy, if you look at the savings rate shot up to like historic highs back in April and following those months, and it stayed pretty high since then because people got a bunch of money, and because a lot of the people who got that money just put it into their bank accounts, wisely, anticipating that someday they would need it, someday later in the year, whatever, worrying that they were going through a time of economic catastrophe. So the thing is, if you want to stimulate the economy, give more money to people who are actually going to spend it. Don't give a flat rate. And I get what you're saying. It is means adjusted, to your income, but depending on where you're living, depending on your responsibilities, and depending on your lifestyle, that's not going to, you might just save it. And at that point, if you have a bunch of people, which you did, just saving money, then what you will get is inflation because the money's not circulating. You just have a greater supply of the money in the economy, et cetera. So even from a modern monetary theory perspective, I don't see how it pans out. But again, I don't want to get into the weeds on this.
That's not why inflation is caused. I mean, inflation is caused when you have too much money trying to buy products.
Is it going to get taxed?
And if you're saying that people are just putting money in the bank, where are you getting inflation from if they're just putting it in the bank?
Because there's more money in the economy. There's more money available to them to spend. And as far as I can tell, the total amount of money in the economy, unless it's getting taxed out or removed in some other way, if that's not decreasing as the total amount of money in the economy is increasing, then at a certain point, the cost-benefit analysis is going to shift. And instead of continuing to save that money, they're going to start spending it. And if you have a bunch of that, then the inflation is going to kick in. If a bunch of people choose to start spending their money and it hasn't been taxed out, then that's where inflation happens.
Well, that's what I'm confused on this one. You want people to spend the money. That's the whole point in putting out there. I mean, because you want basically the money floating around in the economy. I agree with you that half of the country doing fine. I mean, like you had one half of the country that did extremely well because they didn't have to spend money on gas to go to work. They were still getting paid, working remotely. The grocery bills and those type of things might have changed. But you have this other part. I think that's the weird part about the COVID thing, the inequality of it all. You have one group that is fine.
And that's what I'm saying. Give more money to the people who actually need it, and give less money to the people who don't.
Like the argument that McConnell makes is socialism for the rich. It's means adjusted. It's like $100,000 and less, and I think it's even like between $75,000.
But I'm not making his argument. You're responding to me as if I'm making his argument. If anything, I'm making the opposite argument. I would prefer a much sharper ratio where you give more money to the people who actually need it and less money to those who don't. And a simple income cutoff is not all that it takes. Again.
Oh, I see. You want more stringent.
I made less than $75,000 last year. I am a primary breadwinner supporting members of my family. Even, I don't have kids, but family needs the help. I'm doing that stuff, and yet I'm still able to save money. I'm not rich, but it's not like I'm spending it. And I see a lot of people who are suffering, who do need the money,
right,
who frankly deserve it, who aren't getting it because we're having this stupid debate. I mean, not literally.
Well, that's my point. Why even have the debate? Just drop the money. Like, I don't have, that's my point. I don't have an issue. I honestly don't have an issue. I get it.
Because if you have a
And so I don't have an issue if the goal is get the money out. And if there are a few people who get their hands on it that make between 75 and 100K, that doesn't kill me. I'm sorry, it doesn't. I would rather not have this argument, not have the conversation back and forth, and just have the money out. Because I think it helps.
I would take the money too. That money would be
right.
in my pocket.
Right. I guess I'm saying. I mean, look, I get it. But I think the middle class and the poor needs to start thinking about this stuff a little bit in the way that the rich thinks about it. And what oligarch? I mean, you might have some people who are like, no, don't give me the cash. Oftentimes they push hard for those tax cuts, continuously pushing for them, year after year after year. And what did the government do? Give them to them for decades, one tax cut after the next, after the next. Here's more money for you. What did Trump do? Trump passed the tax cut and put the burden of the tax cut on the poor and the middle class. My wife's taxes went up last year. She's not rich by any means. And so it's like, so I get like the wanting it means testing, but I'm not going to protest over this when I've seen the last X number of decades where the bonus and the benefit and the impetus has been to benefit the wealthy of the world. I am not going to weep over this. Yeah.
I said I didn't want to get into the weeds. We've spent the last 7 minutes
fighting over the weeds. Yeah, right. All right. That's fair. That's fair.
I mean, I want to sum up here briefly when it comes to Biden and him going into the presidency and whether or not he actually wanted the Senate. Sure, I think he did, but I don't think he's a particularly ambitious political figure if you look at the span of history. And you're saying a lot of folks might be disappointed in him or not choose to vote for him next election if he doesn't do something impressive with the majority that he has. But here's the thing. I think the shadow of Trump, believe it or not, will still be looming large, at least, if not in the feelings, at least in the minds, at least in the rhetoric of what people say. A lot of people who voted for Biden will be pressured into voting for him again because they will be told he is better than Trump. He's better than what the alternative would have been. And whether or not he's better than the person he's going up against, that comparison will still be made. The Trump shadow is going to linger for years, decades, however long. It's going to be an ongoing phenomenon. And I think that's still going to apply in 2024 and 2022, much more so.
I agree.
But
I agree.
We'll see.
I think Democrats are going to play up the shadow. I think they're going to talk about it like constantly, even in 10 years. Hey, remember when we got Trump because you voted for so-and-so? Like, I think that's going to be there for a while. And I also don't think Trump is going anywhere. I think he's going to be outside. Yeah. Whether that creates another party, whether that creates something that looks like a wing of the Republican Party, I don't know, but I don't think he's going anywhere either. I agree with you, Shane. President Trump claimed in a statement on Tuesday night that he and Vice President Pence are in total agreement on the Vice President's authority regarding the Electoral College count after multiple news outlets reported that Pence told Trump that he lacks the power to alter the election results. Trump's statement said, quote, "The New York Times report regarding comments Vice President Pence supposedly made to me today is fake news. He never said that. The Vice President and I are in total agreement that the Vice President has the power to act. Our Vice President has several options under the U.S. Constitution. He can decertify the results or send them back to the states for changes in certification. He can also decertify the illegal and corrupt results and send them to the House of Representatives for the one vote on one state tabulation," unquote. There will be at least 12 Republican senators and dozens of Republicans in the House of Representatives objecting to the Electoral College results today, potentially pushing the proceedings into Thursday. That's astonishing. Tuesday in Wisconsin, Kenosha County District Attorney Michael Gravelli announced Rustin Shecky, the officer who shot Jacob Blake 7 times, will not, NOT, face charges. Prosecutors showed up to the Kenosha County Administrative Building, and Blake's family said they will be taking the fight to Congress. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I'll read this one just because it's on the news and what we've been talking about earlier today. A British judge has chosen to deny bail to Julian Assange as a journalist waits to hear the results of an appeal to Judge Vanessa Barrister's decision to not grant his extradition to the United States. We had a great segment on, Alexander McCurris earlier at 7:30. You guys can go back and check it where we were talking about Assange. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, definitely give us the like and share that audio and video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So we have with us, joining us, Jason Hinkle. I believe he's joining us. Hinkle, he's a co-organizer of the recent Force the Vote protest in Washington, D.C., which was designed to pressure Pelosi, well, actually was attacking and pressuring AOC to push Pelosi to bring Medicare for All legislation to the House for a vote. Jackson, are you here?
I am. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, there you are. Good. Okay. I wasn't sure. There was a bit of confusion this morning. I wasn't sure if you were able to join us for the show. I'm glad you're here, though. Thank you for joining us. So, Jackson, were you the Force the Vote that was in D.C.? So, 2 questions. Why did you organize the Force the Vote campaign? And do you think it was ultimately successful? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it, we had to do this, right? There's 105 million Americans across this country who are currently uninsured or underinsured in the middle of the pandemic. And people are suffering. They need help right now. And a lot of people recognize, Jimmy Dore included, he kind of helped spark this conversation about trying to force the vote on Medicare for All, that progressives should do the right thing. They have enough power in the House of Representatives to band together, and they could have blocked Nancy Pelosi from becoming Speaker and in turn tried to negotiate for a House floor vote on Medicare for All to give her that speakership position, right? And it's what she wants more than anything else right now. Obviously, it's her last term. This is her legacy. And if we had 8 progressives that had banded together and fought for this, we could have very well had a House floor vote on Medicare for All. Unfortunately, the progressives were going along to get along and weren't really being that progressive. my eyes and didn't fight for Medicare for all, and they voted for Pelosi without any concession. So to answer your first question, we did it because we had to, because people are suffering. And there was an incredible online debate about forcing the vote on Medicare for all. And we decided it was time to take it to the streets, take it to congressional office buildings and let them hear it right in D.C. We had people fly out from all across the country. I myself flew out from California, which is where I'm at right now. And it was really a beautiful sight. And we had an incredible group of speakers that came out as well. Christine Olivo, who's a candidate for Congress in Florida, Nico House, Brianna Joy Gray, the Convo Couch. We had incredible people speak. The question regarding whether I think we were successful, obviously in the big picture, we didn't succeed in getting the progressives to force the vote on Medicare for all. But what I think we did successfully do is, of course, start a conversation about this and increase, the public discussion about Medicare for all and the need for it right now. And also, I think we exposed the progressives for who they truly are. They are careerists, and that doesn't have to be a negative jab at the progressives. I don't necessarily think that. I think these are just people. The squad, people like Mark Pocan, Marie Newman, Jamal Bowman, AOC, Ilhan Omar. These are people we're going along to get along, trying to accumulate more power within the Democratic Party. And I think they would argue maybe one day use that power to fight for policies like Medicare for all. But that's a losing strategy. Every year, 68,000 people die because they don't have health insurance in this country. It's a uniquely American problem. And, we exposed them for who they are and showed this country that in the middle of a pandemic, they are still not willing to fight for Medicare for all at the capacity that they should be fighting for it. And I don't know if you guys saw Jamarl and Shane, but Fraud Squad was trending on Twitter the entire night and the entire next morning after they took that House speakership vote, which was an abomination. It was a historic moment in this country. Many people feel that way. Marianne Williamson also kind of discussed this on Brianna Joy Gray's podcast and Katie Halper's podcast about how historic of a moment this was, that the progressives capitulated to the demands of the establishment in the Democratic Party and failed to fight for their working class constituents who are suffering.
Now, this I agree with you on. I was one of those people who was calling them Fraud Squad when that took place also, especially because to me, when I look at this stuff, I look at it as a competition. And I say Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party has basically undermined you guys one way after the next. Steny Hoyer telling lefties to get out the race in their various districts. Democratic Party putting in resources in the various candidates where they don't even seem to care about what the people in that particular district or that particular area want. The DSCC and the DCCC basically attacking, blacklisting lefty groups or organizations that help lefties get into the race and win the races, with the idea of preventing people like AOC or Ilhan or Rashid Tlaib from ever winning or getting into Congress in the first place. You can go down the list with this stuff. Kennedy, after that ruling put in place, Kennedy primarying Markey and Nancy Pelosi backing Kennedy, being okay and ignoring the entire DSCC and DCCC thing of blacklisting groups that primary are the candidates. It seems like the rule was only for progressives. So I agree with you almost entirely on this notion that going along to get along has utterly failed. And even for Joe Biden, the unconditional support that was given to Joe Biden at a time where Medicare for All had 88% support among Democrats is appalling. It is on its face a loss and an embarrassment. Agreed, 1,000%. Does that mean that you primary the squad? Meaning, are you pushing for, and all the people who were part of the force to vote thing, does this turn into primary AOC, primary Ilhan Omar, primary Rashid Tlaib, primary Bowman just gets in, but primary anyway, primary Cori Bush? do all of these people need to immediately get primary?
What I'll say first is I think it should be up to the constituents of the respective districts, who had this happen to them, who had their Congress people who ran for office saying they were going to immediately fight for Medicare for all, in their campaign speeches, essentially lied to them and failed them. It should be up to those constituents to decide whether they think that they deserve to be primaried. The organizers on the ground, I think, should be making that decision within their own communities. But I think it definitely has to be considered. There's tons of great candidates coming out of the People's Party that's going to be happening in the upcoming 2022 elections that I think we should be looking very closely at.
Just so we're clear, the People's Party is a whole nother party, though. I mean, unless you're saying that the People's Party should defect and then run in the Democratic Party's primary. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it kind of depends, because in some states, like in California, for example, where I'm speaking from, we have what are called open, I think they're called like jungle primaries or something like that, which essentially means that the top two vote earners in a primary advance to the general election regardless of party. So you could have a People's Party candidate and a Republican and no Democrat make it to the general election. So it kind of depends state by state. But I think insofar as states where you have a rigid Democratic primary system for congressional races, it's difficult for me to think of anyone who could operate as a better progressive in Congress within the confines of the Democratic Party than the people that we have right now. I think that people like Ilhan, AOC, members of the squad, they're doing what they can do within the confines of the Democratic Party. They're limited, right? If they don't vote for Nancy Pelosi, they're probably going to get screwed over in unimaginable ways, which is unfortunate. And I think they should do the right thing. That's not to say that they shouldn't do the right thing. I don't think they should prioritize their careers over, fighting for healthcare, doing what they promised to do in their campaigns. But I think...
Jackson, I want to pause on this for a second. Can we try to... thank you for joining us, by the way. Could we pause for a moment on unimaginable? What are the unimaginable ways that you're talking about? Are you talking about them getting snubbed? Or are you talking about them getting assassinated? Like, I'm pretty sure you're not talking about the latter. I'm almost certain you're talking about the former. But, where on the scale? What kinds of actions or repercussions would you see them facing if they were to go up against the brunt of the Democratic Party, whether it's AOC, Jamal Bowman, whomever? Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're already seeing the first actions take place against them, and it was, it's already happening even though they voted for Nancy Pelosi, and that is they're losing their precious committee assignments. We had AOC lose her fight for her coveted committee assignment. That's a huge thing that these progressive politicians within the party care about, is maintaining committee assignments within the House so they can, as they say, leverage their power to fight for progressive policies. The other thing that you can have happen is you have fights within their own district. You can have, the Democratic Party doing exactly what Jamal said at the beginning of the show, which is where you have the DCCC doing exactly what they progressives shouldn't do, which is primarying progressive candidates and primarying them with strong candidates who have a lot of money and using very, very, very dirty tricks against them in these campaigns. So there's a myriad of ways in which the Democratic establishment can, rain down hard on these progressive politicians, especially politicians that don't have the media clout and the followings that people like AOC have. I mean, I think most Americans don't know the name Raul Grijalva. They don't maybe know the name Mondaire Jones. Not to say that these are the most progressive people in Congress. They're not. But if they were to make a decision like voting against Nancy Pelosi, you can bet that there would be a lot of trouble coming their way from the Democratic establishment.
because they don't have the exposure, because they don't have the reach on social media, et cetera. I hear what you're saying. You know what? We're going to have to go into a break here. When we come back, we're going to be taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. We'll be back with Jackson Hinkle talking about Force the Vote and more. He's a political activist, organizer, and host of The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, taking your calls on the other side of the break.
Fault Lines.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are joined by Jackson Hinkle, political activist, organizer, and host of The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. And our phone lines are open. The phone number is 202-521-1320. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
How y'all doing? I have a question for old boy, but let me say what I have to say first. Hashtag important Julian Assange. Hashtag stop the steal. You know, because they stole it from Bernie Sanders, and I feel to believe they're messing over Trump as well. I'm independent, by the way. That's a progressive, and also I believe in some conservative views too. And also declassify everything. I like Jimmy Dore. You know, I think he's doing the right thing. Some people taking issue with his attitude or whatnot, but the thing is this, that since he did research, him and his crew, like Graham Elwood and Robbie Cohn and his wife did research, and they found out since 1940, we've been pushing for a universal healthcare system, or Medicare for all, or a single payer. And I understand why he's upset. I'm upset. I know people that passed away because they didn't have the money to get the medicines and the treatments and MRIs and things like that. So I think just like the mega people protesting for the election today, which they should watch out for provocateurs, I think the people that want Medicare for all, which I want, I think we should get together and start protesting. I think that'd be helpful. And also, populism is not dead. It got Hugo Chavez in the elections in 1999 in Venezuela. It pushed Bernie Sanders forward until they did something. They stole the election from him in an hour. And they're doing the same thing to me, I think, to Trump as well. That's just my opinion. I'm independent. Just letting everybody know. But anyway, so what you think, sir? I mean, how can we go forward from here to push Medicaid for medical care for all? That's all I wanted to say.
I think that's for you, Jackson. Tarif, thank you for the call. Jackson, if you're there, what are your thoughts on that one? What's the best organizing strategy going forward?
Yeah, thank you for the call, and I agree what's happening to Assange right now is an abomination. Thank you for bringing that up. So, I mean, that's exactly what we're doing. So between January 2nd and 4th, we were a group of organizers were gathering every day in front of the congressional office buildings in Washington, D.C., protesting out there and trying to fight for Medicare for all. And I agree that more needs to be done, not just in D.C., but all across this nation. So there's actually, if you go on the Force the Vote Facebook page, if you use Facebook, there's a Facebook group that was started by former Bernie Sanders press secretary Brianna Joy Gray, and you can find all the information that you need to get involved in the Force the Vote effort in your local community, because there are organizers in congressional districts all across the country. I think we have about 1,500 or 1,600 people in our Slack channel now that are organizing to continue the pressure to fight for Medicare for all in the middle of this pandemic and to force their respective congresspeople to actually force a vote on Medicare for all. The fight doesn't stop just because they elected Nancy Pelosi as Speaker this week. We have to continue the pressure. And even if we don't get it within the next 2 years, even if we don't get a House floor vote on Medicare for all within the next 2 years, there's going to be another House speakership vote. This time it's going to be probably Hakeem Jeffries that we're going to be fighting in 2022. So, don't lose sight of what we're fighting for, and get involved in your local community again by going to Force the Vote. It's a Facebook group, and there's also a Slack channel where you can get involved and organize in your own hometown.
You would agree that organizing is a big part of this, right? And allies, meaning groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, the other socialist groups that have been fighting for healthcare for a very long time, that organization also requires cooperation with the other institutions and other organizations that are trying to force the vote. Do you believe that organizing and movement building is a necessary component to try to get Medicare for all over the finish line?
I do. I think that's the only way that we can make this happen, is if we have a groundswell of popular support, specifically popular support from the people who helped get these progressive politicians elected in the first place. If they feel as though their base of support is fleeing because they're not doing their job, they're not doing what they campaigned to do, then they're going to start listening to us. I was disappointed to see that there was really a lack of support, organizational support, for what we were attempting to push for with Force the Vote over the past 2 weeks or so. But I will say that even though the leadership, the executives of these organizations were not keen to force the vote on Medicare for all, to challenge progressive politicians on this, most of the membership of these organizations that you hear of, Sunrise Movement, Democratic Socialists of America, NNU, they were supportive of what we were doing. Not only that, but they were actually fighting with us on the ground. They were making calls to Congress people to try and urge this to happen. We had the co-chair of the Medicare for All steering committee for the Metro DC DSA, who was actually helping lead the organizing efforts in DC. So even if the leadership of these organizations are, happy to support what we're doing, the support is there on the ground.
That's what I was kind of pointing to. Everybody that is in a DSA backs Medicare for all. Everybody that is in the Sunrise Movement most likely backs Medicare for all. Like many of the progressive and the lefty groups, leadership included, even if the leadership doesn't entirely show it. Do you think it's helpful? And that Doar is calling these guys penis heads, that he's deriding the membership and the leadership in the various organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, that not so much that they weren't for Medicare for all, but more so deriding them mainly because AOC is the Democratic Socialists of America, and I suppose they were backing her up.
Yeah, so I think that frankly that Jimmy Dore can say and should say whatever he feels like, because he is one of the millions of Americans who has been personally impacted by this rapacious, murderous, for-profit health insurance system that we have in this country, right? And I think it's ridiculous that you have all of these liberals who are trying to tone police Jimmy Dore, and people like the Force the Vote organizers and myself who are rightfully outraged over what is happening in this country and the lack of fight that we're seeing from progressives. So I think that anger is what we need right now, because that's honestly what we're all feeling. We can't hide our emotions. We have to be willing to fight and show the American people how we feel, because many people are going to resonate with us. They feel that pain. when they see it, they're going to get involved with us.
Anger is good. I'm not denigrating anger. My wife always jokes me because I be yelling on my show. That's not really kind of what I'm getting at. I'm getting at something a little more specific. If we do need allies, and I've heard Jimmy Dore make the argument that we don't need any more organization, that we have enough organization. And again, this is coming from somebody who actually likes Dore, who actually agrees with the force to vote stuff. It just seems like if the entire point is to get a movement, and if the entire objective is to get as many people as possible to kind of join in order for us to kind of overcome and go over the crush the finish line. I mean, when you have 88% support among a party, and the people who are in power aren't representing you because they're not pushing for that policy, that's a problem. And so I agree with you. And it's like, that's angering in and of itself. But should there be limits in the way we communicate? I guess that's all I'm asking. How do you get all of these other people and all of these other groups to join forces, to put pressure on the political instrument to join in? Because my agreement is with you on this, that the fight should be for Medicare for all. People shouldn't be angry about their representatives not doing everything in their power to back Medicare for all. And yeah, you do need this kind of inside-outside game where a large number of people on the outside put huge amount of pressure on people on the inside. And like you said, that doesn't necessarily stop because Nancy Pelosi takes leadership position. Where does this go from here? Is it going to be renamed? Is it just staying with the Force to Vote name and continuing pushing along the side? They kind of like the 5-Star Movement, where it just kept the name and kept running with the name, or the Pirate Party, who just kept the name and kept running with it. What does this become now that the Force to Vote thing didn't necessarily get exactly what it wanted from the standpoint of the Force to Vote? It did get publicity and it did get attention. Where do you continue from here?
Yeah, so to quickly answer that first question, these people, be it organizational leaders or the progressives in Congress themselves, they are the biggest impediments to progressive change in this country at the moment because they had the opportunity to take action and they failed miserably. So I think to be outraged, to be exposing them for who they are, and to be calling them names if that's how you take out your anger, those are all acceptable responses to what we saw take place in that chamber of Congress during that House speakership vote. So I totally think that's an acceptable way to respond to what happened. These people are supposed to be representing us, doing that as a job. They're not to be idolized or to receive unconditional praise. Like these people can do wrong. So it's an important thing to recognize. And what do we do from here? Like I just mentioned to the previous caller, you can get involved in your own community. Go to Force the Vote on Facebook. We have a Slack channel where you can start organizing in your own community with other activists and try to pressure your own respective politicians to fight to force the vote on Medicare for all. We have to get more progressive politicians elected. So maybe people like AOC will actually have the spine to fight for Medicare for all and to challenge leadership. And then lastly, like I mentioned at the start of this discussion, I do think it's important to look at candidates who are not operating within the confines of the Democratic Party, who don't have to respond to party leadership, who don't have to go along to get along. And that could look like a third party, be it Green Party, People's Party. There's other parties as well. But we have to start looking at other parties, because if we don't, I don't think we're going to see the movement that we need to see in the time that we need to see it take place in.
Hey, Jackson, real quick question. We're hitting up against a break here, but we have a rush of callers calling in. Would you be able to stick with us for another 15 minutes? Because I think some of these folks might have had questions for you, or at least relating to this conversation. Would that be okay with you?
Of course.
Awesome. Thank you. For those listening, that was the voice of Jackson Hinkle, political activist, organizer, and host of The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. Follow him on Twitter at Jackson Hinkle. That is Hinkle with a K and 2 L's, by the way. Also check out his YouTube channel, The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to be taking 3 calls on the other side of this break, and possibly taking more if you want to call in. 202-521-1320 is the number. We'll be right back. Fault Lines on the other side.
Fault Lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Hinkle. We are joined by our guest, Jackson Hinkle, political activist, organizer, and host of The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. He was a co-organizer of the recent Force the Vote protests in Washington, D.C., designed to pressure Nancy Pelosi into bringing Medicare for All legislation to the House floor for a vote. We have a bunch of callers, so I'm going to go straight to them. First up, we have Kyrie Simon calling in from Florida. Kyrie, you're on the line. What is on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, guys? I kind of agree with the caller, the guy that's on right now, but I disagree in a sense of saying bring in more progressives. And the reason why I say that is with this recent stunt that the progressives just pulled, don't you think that kind of adds a little bit of distrust in the whole progressive movement? And don't you think it's like a little it's a little scary for them to ignore, for example, the Force the Town Hall, the Force the Vote Town Hall, when over 100,000 people, which is considered their constituents, was watching, and none of them responded. And you had a person like Kyle Kalinske on, who was a founder of the Justice Democrats, which, you know, AOC and them is a part of, but they even ignored him. But don't you think that's a problem? Don't you think that kind of comes off as a sense of entitlement or a sense of I don't have to listen to the constituents with them pulling this recent move?
Jackson, thank you for the call. Great call. You're pushing back here. Yeah, go for it. Jackson, what's your take?
I 100% think that you're right. I think that is the argument that progressives in Congress would make, that they need more allies before they can take action, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think they could take action right now, but I do think that I maybe I'm a bit naive, but I'm hopeful that they are at least honest actors in that capacity in regards to that take, that if they did have more allies in Congress, that they'd be more willing to act. But again, I'm personally done with the Democratic Party. I was a big supporter of AOC. I even had one of her shirts. I had bought one of her T-shirts. I'm looking at other alternatives, and I will be campaigning for third-party candidates in the upcoming elections, because I think that's the only way that we can truly challenge power, challenge the Democratic leadership, and do what we need to do, which is establish viable third parties in this country. And I don't envy the work of the people who are leading up this party and starting it, the People's Party I'm referring to right now, because I think that's our most viable option. We have an incredible leadership and executive board that's forming there with the People's Party. But it's the work that needs to be done, and I'm there to help make it happen.
You know what? We've got a bunch of other callers. I would want to talk about that a little bit more.
Real quick. It'll be like 30 seconds. I love that call, because that call is getting into the honesty of the arguments that are basically being made on the left right now. I mean, basically, because it feels like you can't have it both ways. If you want to get anything done in Congress, anything at all, and you want to enshrine it and instantiate it into law, you have to have somebody in Congress to do it. Whether that's a Democrat, whether that's some other third party, whatever that is, there needs to be something in your political device to do it. Otherwise, you're talking about something else. You're not talking about, politics or reform or whatever. From the standpoint of the caller basically saying, what's the point of putting any more people in or any more lefties in? Look, the question is, do you honestly believe that AOC wants Medicare for all in the Green New Deal? And the answer, of course, I think is yes. How they pull it off, I don't know. And especially with the 6. Should they have put a line in the sand this time around? Yes, I do agree with that. But I'm not on board with this notion of getting rid of AOC or not putting in other lefties that actually believe in this stuff. Because I actually do believe that if you're going to get anything accomplished, you got to have it enshrined into law. And one last point. AOC did engage. Let's not pretend that she didn't. She did engage. She did bring this up. She did talk about forced to vote. Ilhan Omar brought this up. Ilhan Omar talked about forced to vote. In fact, Ilhan Omar was for it. She gave it affirmative for it. So it's not like they didn't engage and talk about it. They just disagreed. Let's go to the next caller. I don't know who the next caller is. Let's see. The next caller is it Brave?
We have with us Brave.
Brave.
Calling in from Atlanta. Yeah, Brave. Brave, you're on the line.
Okay.
What's going on, man?
Good morning, guys. Listening to the conversation this morning, and other things that I've been listening to this morning, this week, and just period. I'm starting to feel like, well, I'm not starting to feel like, I think we're at a point where first we have to look at some unconventional methods and ways of thinking. One being to stop considering ourselves or aligning ourselves even with the two-party system. And I know that we have we have independent party options, but we all argue that it's not really viable because of the two-party lock on our politics. I think that we need to start thinking outside of the box. I mean, first and foremost, so let me make it quick. I want to hold it up. First and foremost, I would say that we need to stop considering ourselves Democrats, right? Because we're not being, and I would address this. I would address this to Republicans as well, because neither the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is addressing any of our concerns.
Exactly.
We're American people, and we need to be more concerned with the populist movement. We need to be more concerned with the independent movement, and we need to channel our efforts into breaking the stranglehold of these two corporations on our on our government. And there is a means of doing this. Mike Gravel, in his book, the failure representation of representative government, he goes into the people actually putting together laws, passing laws, amending the Constitution, actually having votes without even consideration to those people in Washington. So should we send more progressives up there? Yeah, vote for the people that speak to your interests. But we have to get the change off of our brains first and foremost and get serious. I mean, and no, I don't think we have time for tone policing. Let the people on the floor in Congress and in Senate, they can tone police and all of that stuff. But at some point, we have to make a decision of whether we're going to stand up and start taking action or just continue to have conversations. Because if we're going to just continue to have conversations, we're not going to get anywhere. That's one. And two, we don't have a propaganda machine large enough to fight this machine that's been put together to have us walk in line in chains. So there's plenty of information that's been put out. There's plenty of tactics that have been put out by the people that came before us. We just got to kind of toughen up a little bit, get the sand out of our crotches, stand up, and not be afraid to take action.
Real quick, Brave, what action should people take?
Again, this is what I'm talking about. I just said we have there's been plenty of things lined out, and I don't pretend that I have every single answer, right? But one thing that I do know is that the roadmap has been laid clear, right? So again, I'll address it again. Mike Gravel himself put out a book that laid it out, and I'm not saying that his stuff is perfect and underline and outlines everything, but it does lay out how people can come together and work to pass policy. Right, to get to put policy in action, to amend the Constitution. There's all kinds of things out there that we can do. There's all kinds of action we can take. But first and foremost, before anything, we have to get angry. So when your guest says that we need the anger of the people, we need the rage of the people, we need it because the point was made that AOC and them, who I do still have faith in, I understand their position. Right, they're on the floor. There are literal rules in place that don't allow them to speak to each other in certain ways. We don't have to abide by those rules, right? When and I might be jumping around a bit, but still follow me. When we had the protest over George Floyd and all of that, right? What got the attention? It wasn't just the amount of people that were walking. And if no one else will say it, I will say it. It's the rage that got their attention. It's the rage that scared Washington. It's the rage. And until we get to that point, and you guys, you almost got there yesterday. Even your guests almost got there yesterday. Until we get to the point where we're willing to stop saying, I'm not condoning this, I'm not condoning this. Listen, we've been begging, pleading, asking, going all the way back to the 60s just for black people alone. Before that, right? So how long do we continue just to have the conversation? It's not enough anymore. It's not enough to just be on YouTube and say the news. It's not enough anymore. It's not enough. So if you have a platform, then your platform should be used. If you really are serious about this, your platform should be used to motivate people into thinking independently, not just having the conversation. And I don't mean to belittle the conversation because it's very important. I don't mean to belittle intellectuals. It's very important, but we can't just be smart. You know what I'm saying? We can't just keep talking. Right? We can't just keep talking. We're not going to be able to do a online we're not going to be able to accomplish online pressure of people in Washington. No, because online is just online. Twitter is just Twitter. And yes, the real world online, but it's just Twitter. We need rage. And then we need action, because you can't say, "Oh, well, I want to do this, but I don't want to put that energy in this if it's not going to win." Who knows who's going to win? You don't know if you're going to win until you take a step off the cliff. You dig what I'm saying? And I feel like a lot of people are very, 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 very comfortable, including myself. I started off homeless. I worked to where I am now, right? But one thing I did learn in the military is when you got to take the hill, you attack the hill. You have to dedicate yourself to attacking the hill, not having the conversation. Right? Not just having the conversation, not just, well, we do it if we're going to win, or and not, well, we got to talk a certain way when we do it. No. Rage.
Brave. Thank you for the call. Jackson, we got a couple more callers on the line here. Any quick response to that?
I mean, all I'm going to say to that is, of all the languages in the world, that last caller just spoke facts. I mean, that's exactly how I feel, and that's the energy we need to get shit done in this country.
Hey, no cursing.
All right.
Yeah, we can't have you cursing.
Yeah, real quick. FCC will come down on us.
And because, I mean, rage is fine, but you are on the radio station. And
it's not you. I apologize.
No, you're fine. Look, rage is fine, but, let's stop pretending that getting something accomplished, you can act any way you want. The world doesn't work that way. You can be as mad as you want to be, and that rage being put in all of these erections. Just because you're angry doesn't necessarily mean that anger is going to be used constructively. Constructive rage, yes, is good. Constructive anger is quite good. But yelling in a phone booth, no. Look, I agree with the premise of the force to vote stuff. I even agree with the force to vote stuff. I even agree that it should be done and said full-throatedly. But let's be very clear. If you were in a militaristic campaign, if you were in some other campaign where your objective was to get something accomplished, there are ways that you go about getting accomplished. Structured ways, dancing between the raindrops at times, thought through ways that I just don't buy this thing that you can act any particular way you want in order to accomplish every objective. But we have two more callers. Let's go to, 99% agree with what Brave was saying. Tim from New York. Tim, what's going on?
Good morning. Happy New Year, guys. Hey, I just wanted to quickly get in the weeds with Shane about the inflation. My understanding is that you'd have to really flood the economy with money being actually spent.
Yeah, you do.
I think that would. I don't think sitting in the bank would really hurt anything.
That doesn't matter.
I'm not sure.
Like if you were, say, for example, people started putting money into school. And all of a sudden, you had a shortage of books, you had a shortage of wood, you had a shortage of desks, you had a shortage of all this stuff because all of a sudden people start buying up those items for the schools. Well, then you get inflation because the amount increases because you have more people that are buying or trying to get their hands on those items. But the money just sitting in the bank is not necessarily going to do it. I agree with you.
Yeah, but that's not what I said. We should come back to this. Yeah, this is a different topic. We should come back to that. Feel free to call back in, Tim, in an hour. When we're taking more calls. Louise, I'm sorry we didn't get to you. Hopefully we'll get to you. If you want to call back in another hour, please do.
Yeah.
Wish we'd had the time. Thank you, Jackson, for joining us. For those listening, Jackson Hinkle, political activist, organizer, and host of The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. He was a co-organizer of the recent Force the Vote protest in Washington, D.C., designed to pressure Nancy Pelosi into bringing Medicare for All legislation to the House floor for a vote. You can follow Jackson on Twitter at Jackson Hinkle with a K and two L's. Also check out his YouTube channel, The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. We will be back in a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for our last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news, events, and politics across the country as well as across our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Getting into the headlines, first up in the news, the U.S. reported its highest daily COVID-19 death count ever Tuesday. More than 3,770 American deaths were reported in one day, more than 24 above the country's previous record set less than a week ago. The country also topped 21 million infections Tuesday and set a hospitalization record with more than 131,100 COVID-19 hospitalized patients nationwide. As a result, governors plan on distributing vaccines faster by mobilizing National Guard members and training more volunteers to administer vaccines. Earlier Tuesday, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data showed 17 million doses had been distributed and more than 4.8 million had been administered. That means only about 28% of the distributed doses have been administered. World Health Organization, meanwhile, said that China has blocked the arrival of a team investigating the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said 2 scientists on the United Nations team had already left their home countries for Wuhan when they were told that Chinese officials had not approved the necessary permissions to enter the country. The arrangements had been jointly agreed upon with China in advance. In national political news, specifically in the Georgia Senate races, Democrat Raphael Warnock was declared the victor in one of Georgia's 2 Senate runoff elections, defeating incumbent Senator Kelly Loeffler. Warnock, a pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church where Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once preached, became the first black man elected to represent Georgia in the Senate. Hours before it was officially called, Warnock declared victory in a virtual address to supporters. Loeffler, meanwhile, did not concede in her own speech late Tuesday night. Loeffler said, quote, we got some work to do here. This is a game of inches. We're going to win this election. We're going to save this country, end quote. Kind of echoing the same approach to this as Trump, apparently, just refusing to concede effectively. Anyway, in the other race, Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff is leading GOP Senator David Perdue, 50.2%, to Purdue's 49.8% at 98% reporting. That was as of a few hours ago. We'll see how this goes, but it looks like Ossoff has a small margin, but enough of a margin to claim victory soon. But again, we will see where this goes. Hundreds of supporters of President Trump descended on Washington, D.C. yesterday, planning to protest today's expected congressional certification of Democrat Joe Biden's victory in the November 3rd presidential election. As of late Tuesday, police had already arrested at least 6 people for a variety of offenses, including weapons and ammunition possession, possessing a stun gun, and assaulting a police officer. President Trump, meanwhile, claimed in a statement on Tuesday night that he and Vice President Mike Pence are in quote-unquote total agreement on the vice president's authority regarding the Electoral College count. This after multiple news outlets reported Pence told Trump he lacks the power to alter the election results. Trump's statement said, quote, the New York Times reports regarding comments Vice President Pence supposedly made to me today is fake news. He never said that. The vice president and I are in total agreement that the vice president has the power to act. Our vice president has several options under the U.S. Constitution. He can decertify the results or send them back to the states for change and certification. He can also decertify the illegal and corrupt results and send them to the House of Representatives for the one vote for one state tabulation, end quote. There will be at least 12 Republican senators and dozens of Republicans in the House of Representatives objecting to the Electoral College results today, this potentially pushing the proceedings until tomorrow into Thursday.
Yesterday in Wisconsin, Kenosha County District Attorney General Michael Gravelli announced that Rustin Shesky, the white officer who shot Jacob Blake 7 times, will not face charges. Protesters showed up to the Kenosha County Administration Building, and Blake's family said they will be taking the fight to Congress. And yet we don't, as far as I can tell, we don't see protests. Jamarl, we've kind of gone back and forth on this. Earlier in the year, we were disagreeing about Black Lives Matter protests and some of this stuff. I kind of came around on some of it, but broadly, one thing I do think we frankly agree on is that this all died out as we got closer and closer to the election. And on the other side of Biden's election, I'm curious, do you think with Biden in the White House, are we going to see anything like this? I mean, granted, Black Lives Matter first started during Obama's second term. So that was back in 2014? That started, well into an Obama presidency, well into a Democratic presidency, but it accelerated dramatically, I would say, in 2020. And it certainly persisted much more. It lasted for many more months and was much more widely distributed across the country. Do you think we're going to see anything like that during a Biden term? There's certainly, it seems like the fuel is set up for it, with most of the crimes here not being redressed by justice systems, by the political systems, by the police officers in these counties. Jamarl, what's your take?
I don't. And it's not because anything changes per se. It's not because police are going to be shooting blacks less. The Jacob Blake thing is normal. And I know people are outraged by it, but cops kill 1,000 people a year. The only thing about the Jacob Blake thing is he didn't die. That's probably the abnormality of it. But you get 1,000 people killed a year with 99% of cops not being charged. So it's like this is the most normal thing in the world that people are aghast by. And maybe the fact that it's normal should be something that should be the thing that you're aghast by. That should be the problem. I don't think
that's
that
what
changes.
They were aghast by.
Well, I guess my point is I don't think that changes under Biden. Like you said, Black Lives Matter was started under Obama. What changed? It went under Trump, and the media was looking for anything to hit Trump with. And so it was a huge deal. It made a huge impact. It made a huge splash. It was one of those things that they were using against Trump. When Biden comes in office, king of blacks, are they going to have these type of protests? Or is it going to be like Occupy Wall Street, where it was just absorbed by the Obama administration, despite the fact that it was pretty much leveled during the Obama administration? Do you see my point? It seems that the Democratic Party has a propensity to absorb movements like this. And so I have a hard time believing that even if it does spark up, that it's not just absorbed. I don't know. I'm skeptical of whether or not movements like this can rear up in the Democratic Party and go after Democrats in a way that draw blood, because it doesn't seem like they could do it in the Obama administration either. Trump, yes, but it's Trump. He's an ogre.
Occupy movement didn't really do much. No. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, they did. I'm not going to say that because the 99.1%, the language of it was set by Occupy Wall Street.
It did, but what did that do? That was 2012. That was after Obama was elected. He was elected on this sort of semi-populist wave, making changes happen effectively.
Just said language.
That was before Occupy.
Yeah, it was just language.
Yeah, and then on the 2012, 2013 Occupy movement happened. But what did it practically do? The rhetoric, 99%. Again, I think it wasn't coined, but it was popularized by David Graeber, an author, anarchist, anthropologist I'm a big fan of. So I identify in some sense with that. But what did the movement actually productively do? What did it manage to produce?
Language. That's what I'm telling you, Shane. I agree with you from the
standpoint. That's an appearance.
Materially, it wasn't like the Tea Party, where these guys lined up and they started getting political wins and putting people in offices and stuff like that. It's funny, John Boehner, there's a story with that. John Boehner goes to see the Tea Party and he says, those people are mad as hell. We're going to win this. and he was right. They won it. But I don't know what they did beyond language. I mean, that's kind of my point. You had Obama, who was in office.
And that's nothing. That's talking.
That's my point. Obama
anything.
Absorbs the language of the conversation itself without doing anything about it. He just absorbed the language. I'm saying that they didn't get anything accomplished from the standpoint of materially putting people in offices and changing policy and that stuff. What they were able to do is get language instantiated into the American public. Now, you can say that's nothing. Fair enough. But I would say it is something, if only to even iconize what you're seeing at that particular moment to explain it later on. But fair enough. If you want to say that it didn't accomplish anything tangible and real and material sense, fair enough. I agree.
I would say that identity politics, which we deride constantly, has done literally more, because not only has identity politics affected the language, it's actually gotten people from certain demographics put into place. Is that enough? No. The language on its own is nowhere near enough. And if you say the words but you don't do the deeds, then ultimately what you get is an idealistic, disenfranchised public. And that's where we are, frankly.
You realize that
that's my take.
You realize this stuff doesn't magically happen, right? That there's all sorts of underlying things that go into making things and events take place in our real material world. That they don't start off as just, bam, it's there. You start off creating a language. You start off creating a movement for that stuff. You start off getting a momentum for that stuff. If your objective is to all of a sudden have something done all at once when you snap your fingers, that's never going to take place. Reality doesn't work in those terms. They just don't. I mean, I get it. It's insufficient for our wants. Yes, 1000% agree. But do you need something as a primary, as a base? Yeah, and I'm not gonna, I would have wished that the Occupy Wall Street people fell in line. Kind of like a militaristic thing that we're in it to do this, we're gonna accomplish this and that, etc. Unfortunately, they didn't do that. They always said the left is like herding cats. So I agree with you. I do agree with you on it. But I don't agree that it's nothing. And I think my thing is that it always takes this kind of underlying thing to get anything off, or to get anything started. And if the language was appropriated by Obama, fair enough. But at the very least, the language of the 99 and 1% did outlast. And I got to be honest, I heard that from them, not Graber, even though Graber might have been the primary for it. So somebody at that event heard Graber, and that bubbled up.
I would say it's less than nothing. Here's the thing. If what you do is you get people excited for something, or you get people motivated, and then you do nothing with that energy, if it is completely feckless, if it manages to produce nothing, and all you did was get people's hopes up and get them even more disappointed in the political process and protesting in general, if you get people's hopes up and then you disappoint them, that's less than nothing. That's a net negative. It's not as if you managed to produce something, even if that nothing was marginal. It's that you actually wasted the time and energy of people who devoted their attention to it. And I was kind of critical of Occupy back in the day, but I was also excited by it because, hell, if they can get something done, then go for it. Yeah. But as far as I could tell, it was mostly a lot of people having fun in parks. That was not actually, it didn't produce anything.
No,
that's the thing. As somebody who wants to see deeper political and economic change in this country, Occupy was a massive disappointment.
Well,
that's partly because it was exciting.
Well, I do think people wanted to see the change. And I do think people were disappointed. I, for one, was disappointed by what seemed to be this kind of, people getting together without having a leader and trying to make and get those things accomplished. I feel you. I get it. But less than nothing. I don't buy that. I mean, that's like saying Graeber's books amounted to less than nothing because the world didn't change overnight. He was able to get that particular opinion steeped into the debate enough where those people started having arguments about 99 and the 1%. So much so that Obama starts talking about the 99 and the 1% Now, you could say they didn't accomplish their objectives, but to say it was nothing is ludicrous.
It is. Again, if here's the thing: if we're all talking about roses and we're smelling crap, then all we're doing is diluting ourselves. We're not actually beautifying the world or making the world any better. If all we're doing is talking about repairing fundamental injustices and we're doing nothing about it, then all we're doing is diluting ourselves. We're not actually doing anything.
Talking is, by definition, something. Having the conversation
not if
and
your words have no
imagining something different is, by definition, something. Like, I guess my issue is to say it's less than nothing is literally false. It's literally
no, because it's net
false.
Negative. That's what I'm saying. It does not produce moral value. In fact, it takes moral value away. That's exactly what I mean. If you're talking about a moral good, whether or not it was a good thing to do, it was a bad thing to do. If you look at what happened from it, consequentially, because they wasted time, they wasted energy, they wasted attention. Nobody seemed to learn anything. And now people are defending it by saying, well, at least we said the right words.
What are you talking about?
And that's a waste.
What are you talking about? Are you serious? You honestly believe that things materially happen just magically overnight without the underground and the underlying premise of those things?
You're misportraying what I'm saying.
Stuff was more than just energy, Shane. It was putting an emphasis on something that says, hey, circle around this particular thing. This thing is an issue. So much so that the Democratic president literally starts to appropriate the language. That's what I'm telling you. If it was nothing, there's no appropriation of the language. If there's nothing, you don't have all of those people in those events making all of that noise talking about inequality. And even though it may take a decade for this stuff to kind of gain momentum and stuff, you can't look at the primary in the beginning of it and say there was nothing. I don't even know how you come to that.
8 years on.
assessment.
It's 8 years on. If I were saying this in the summer or fall of 2012, you'd have a reason to push back on me, Jamarl. But we're 8 years on, and nothing happened other than the president appropriating the language and doing nothing with it. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Running in a race where he was arguing Medicare for all and all of that stuff. You believe that the Sanders thing happens without Occupy Wall Street.
And what did Sanders do? He lost. I don't know what you're...
See, that's what I'm getting at, Shane. It's almost as if you believe that the only way something or progress happens is if all of a sudden, all at once, everything falls into place. And reality just does not work that way. It just doesn't work that way.
No,
it takes false starts.
Putting up these straw men. That's not what I'm saying.
With ideas.
Jamarl, we need to close. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That's not what I'm saying, Jamarl. You're putting up a straw man there.
I'm not putting up a straw man. I am literally talking about what you are saying, and you're acting as if the Occupy Wall Street thing had no effect. In fact, not even no effect, less than an effect, which I'm saying is ludicrous on its face. If a Sanders exists, if Obama is appropriating the language, these people are doing it for a reason, and that reason is not for smoke. But go ahead. Do you think? I don't buy this argument that Occupy Wall Street was nothing or less than nothing in the way that you say it, just because things didn't, I don't know, the world didn't change.
I know organizers, and I've known for a long time organizers of Occupy movements in their cities who are deeply disappointed with how the movement went. We can come back to that. We need to go into a break. Let's come back to that at the end of the show. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, getting fiery, getting fault-liney. We'll be back in a minute with Bob Schley-Hubert coming to us live from the Stop the Steal rally in D.C.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Bob Schley-Hubert. We are joined by the host of Political Misfits with Bob Schley-Hubert right here on Radio Sputnik. You can listen to that show, by the way, on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can follow Political Misfits on Twitter at Sputnik Misfits. Bob, thank you for being with us. How are you doing this morning?
Shane, Jamarl, great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well, thank you. I am out here at the Eclipse just on the south side of the White House where thousands of Trump supporters have gathered. He is to speak here allegedly at 11 a.m. I'm sure it'll be much later than that, but Congressmember Mo Brooks just spoke and the crowd's rallied up. It's quite, I thought it was going to be small numbers. There's definitely thousands of people out here that continue to flood around the Washington Monument here, Shane.
Bob,
that is remarkable.
Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, so how many people are they expecting? Do you know?
They said like 5,000 on their permit. I think that would be a good guess by the end of it. I mean, just seeing the numbers of people walking down this early, and as I mentioned, Donald Trump's supposed to speak at 11 o'clock, so you got quite a bit of people still making their way. But yeah, it's a big turnout. I mean, just a few weeks ago on a weekend, there was probably less than this almost, or even at the same amount. But I thought it was kind of the last gasp 2 weeks ago, and then here the folks are out once again showing their support for Donald Trump.
And where do you think, what's the emotional atmosphere? What's the tenor out there? Are you seeing counter protests? What is it actually like, for those sitting in their seats at home?
Yeah, there's not counter protesters. Black Lives Matter DC and others had said that they were not going to come down and counter protest today because they didn't want to be looking like that they were out here in support of Joe Biden, which is confusing. Aren't Biden supporters, it's people that want to fight back against fascism and white supremacy. So it kind of confuses what's taking place today, which is the protection of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris being elected to the presidency. Here, it's a mix of festive and a mix of anger, I don't know, whatever that intersection ends up being. A lot of folks walking around chanting America first, a lot of signs around steal your vote, a lot of Jesus saves. Maybe today is the second coming of Jesus Christ to protect Donald Trump's sacred right to stay in the White House. I'm not sure if that happens today. A lot of don't tread on me flags as well. And obviously the infamous Donald Trump Rambo flag. So people playing bagpipes, people playing the guitar, and hanging out, having a good time. But again, underlying that is quite a bit of anger at what's taking place in Wall.
Bob, that's profound. Have you had the opportunity to speak to anyone yet? Like, what's the prevailing conversation?
Well, I was going to, and then you see the video last night at one of their rallies, and they had somebody ask to turn to their neighbor, hug them, and scream out "super spreader." And I didn't find that funny, Jamarl, in the mix of a pandemic, as these folks are hugging people. Maybe only 10% of people have masks on. So I've been eavesdropping much more than I have been actually actively talking to folks, because people are pretty loud without having to have been asked any questions. So I got down here about a half hour ago and just kind of taking in the crowd so far right now.
And I'm curious, what is, especially compared to the Black Lives Matter protests in last year's summer, at this point it's last year's summer, what's the police presence like out there right now?
Yeah, there's very little police presence whatsoever. The area in front of the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, where Black Lives Matter Plaza kind of ends, has been a place of quite notoriety. At the 16th Street, I think you guys probably talked about on the show, there's a large wall of photos and art commemorating those who have lost their lives to police brutality and white supremacy. And with the first Proud Boy March here in Washington, D.C., that became a flashpoint as those pictures and art got torn down off that wall. Today, that area is completely blocked off. You cannot get within 2 blocks of that. So quite heavy police presence protecting the north side of the White House. And then with it, like I said, more of a kind of a festival kind of atmosphere here this morning, which is just weird to see. Not much police presence within the area in which people are gathering. I'm sure surrounding the White House, surrounding the downtown area is pretty closed off to cars. I mean, it's kind of a no-go zone for any type of vehicles, people having to park a half mile away to get down here. So I'm sure there's quite a heavy police presence around the perimeter, but police are not actively within the gathering area here at the Washington Monument and the Ellipse.
Now, you were at many of the Black Lives Matter protests, especially some of the fighting. I mean, D.C. was a flashpoint. I mean, I remember at one point some of the images of D.C. were flames all over the place. How's this different? Like, Shane asked about the police presence, but does it feel different tonally? And I know that's somewhat of a strange question. It's more of a felt sense question.
Yeah, well, I was laughing. I wanted to come out here this morning with a sign that says "Get a job." That's how those Black Lives Matter protests are always framed as a bunch of people out there angry without jobs, just screaming for no reason. So here you are today on a Tuesday morning with thousands of people out here not at their quote-unquote jobs. I guess the difference is kind of where the anger is directed to and where the threats are. I mean, you have a Black Lives Matter movement that is led by oppressed people that are targeted by the state violently. They are economically oppressed, socially and politically targets of the state. And I think the Black Lives Matter protest is looking to critique the overall system that is Democrats and Republicans, anybody that holds office and upholds the system. Here it's much different. I mean, it's a vast majority, as you can imagine, white men that are out here today. They are not the people that the state looks to target violently. The state goes out of its way to protect them, goes out of their way to write laws that protect them if they commit acts of violence. And so you have people out here today that aren't feeling that same type of violent threat against them. Sure, they have grievances where they think they were wronged by the vote tally. This is a lot of the steal the vote signs out here today. the threat that's coming under the Trump supporters here today is obviously much, at least from my perspective, much different, Jamarl, if that's kind of what you're getting at.
And what about, okay, so no counter protesters as far as you can tell so far, at least. But what about like the most adamant and arguably violent of the pro-Trump protesters? Have you seen Proud Boys out there today? Any obvious Proud Boys in the crowd?
Yeah, I mean, last night at that earlier rally, kind of the kickoff rally to the, again, it's weird to call it 2-day festivities or 2-day counter protest. Proud Boys were out late last night. I believe 8 people were arrested in Washington, D.C. Charges ranged from illegal carry of firearms to resisting arrest to assaulting a police officer, unregistered firearm, simple assault, possession of prohibited weapon, a taser, and someone driving an unauthorized van. So, excuse me, to say 6 arrests were made late last night. Pepper spray was used by the Metropolitan Police Department against members of the Proud Boys. And so I would assume that if there is to be continued violence, it would come after this kind of larger gathering today here at the Ellipse. It'll break off into some of the smaller parts of the city, especially if people are staying overnight. People go out drinking, people go out walking the streets, and they're definitely looking for trouble at that point. And so we saw some of it last night, but so far this morning, things have not been at that kind of energy level.
I'm fascinated that this is taking place, even though I would imagine it's a little bit surreal. Like you said, you haven't necessarily had the conversations with people, more so like, the COVID COVID combos.
Yeah.
And I would never ask you to take a hit for the team in order to have that conversation. But does there seem to be any concern about COVID at all? I mean, like, it's like the people aren't wearing masks. Donald Trump considered it unmanly, apparently, to put on a mask and prevent yourself from getting COVID-19. And like you said, many of the people there aren't wearing masks. Is there just no concern about this element at all? I mean, it really is. We're putting it all on the line for Trump, including our physical health.
Yeah, I mean, watch the video last night. You want surreal. It's having somebody direct the crowd to hug their neighbor from wherever they were and to yell out super spreader. I mean, it's quite remarkable. That kind of sets the tone. Yeah, it's interesting walking around. The one person I did want to talk to.
And wait, Bob, just to interrupt for a moment, to put it in perspective, didn't 3,700 people die yesterday from COVID?
I mean, it's remarkable. It's people from across the country that are here. I mean, one people I was just walking next to, they were from Michigan. So it's not like it's just kind of isolated in D.C. where the virus is, I don't know, where the better handling parts of the country. I mean, these people are from around the country traveling. And yeah, not a good moment whatsoever. I did want to go up to one person that was wearing a Pence Trump face mask amongst a lot of people not wearing masks. You just say, one, who authorized the making of this mask to have their names on it? Surely they did it. And then 2, why are you wearing a mask when nobody else around you is? So I would really be curious to hear some of the subculture of the 10%ers here that are wearing masks, because yeah, the rest of the people, I mean, it's shoulder to shoulder. I mean, it's jam-packed. There's not much consciousness right now towards COVID. People are trying to get as close as they can. So there's a large stage erected on the south lawn of the White House where there's crowds gathered, and they kind of just backfilled to the Washington Monument. And yeah, a lot of folks not wearing masks, standing very close to each other, talking very loudly amongst the noise.
Bob, actually, on the subject of the crowd, I'm curious, compared to, were you out at the Women's March in D.C. a couple of years ago?
I was.
How would it compare size-wise and, density-wise?
Yeah, this is tiny compared to that. I mean, this is 5,000 people. I mean, there was hundreds of thousands of people at the Women's March. And
that's nothing.
This is just kind of, the whole, I mean, like I said, quite a few people. It's a lot of the Washington Monument, the lawns that are here are filling up, but you can tell that it's not continuing at the pace it was maybe a half hour ago as people first arrived. So it's still trickling in, but it does definitely feel like it's kind of teetering off. I would say 5,000 people, which if you're Donald Trump and you're in the White House for 14 more days and you have nothing to present whatsoever as a case to stay here, to get 5,000 people out on a Wednesday to travel, it's pretty remarkable. So it's the last fragment. It's not a million people. It's definitely, I think, 5,000 of 71 million people that voted for you. It's not overwhelming. If you had a million people out here, it definitely would be a much different story than it is today.
Bob, from the perspective of the people there and the speakers and everything else, what's the main tenor? I mean, do they think that this election is going to be overturned? Do they think, is this just to get out anger? Like, what's What's the ultimate point of this? Based on the conversations you've been overhearing for the people that was here.
Yeah, I mean, to steal the vote. It stop the vote steal. And yeah, I guess great question, Jamarl. It's hard to answer, right? Because there's no evidence, and 50 plus lawsuits now had not even returned a little bit to run with. And so all they needed is one. They needed one lawsuit to go their way, and there may be twice as many people here today. But with none of that, yeah, I mean, the focus is on the steal of the vote. Donald Trump was cheated. There's a deep state that's after him, trying to throw him out of office. They finally got him, and they have to fight back. And a lot of it's still this kind of socialist and communist boogeyman.
Yeah.
And a lot of, like I mentioned, overwhelmingly number of Trump flags and U.S. American flags. Quite a bit of anti-Chinese sentiment out here as well, by a range of different people, both people that do look Chinese and Americans as well. I would kind of say that's in the running for maybe the fifth or sixth most propagated message out here today.
That is so weird. I'm enamored by this. I'm in Maryland, and so this is maybe an hour away. And apparently the cops and everything else is filled the area and everything else. Bob, thank you, man. You're our Johnny on the spot, our person who's taking the hit. Wear your mask, get your lube up and everything with your with the antibiotic stuff, and just be careful, man. But thank you, Bob.
On the spot here today.
Absolutely. Bob is host of the Political Misfits, Bob Schlehuber. We are on Radio Sputnik, and as you guys knew, Bob was my co-host on Political Misfits for a while before I started doing Fault Lines, so it is definitely nice to hear from him again. This is host of Political Misfits with Bob Schlehuber and Jamarl Thomas here on Radio Sputnik. You can listen to, Michelle Whitty of Political Misfits. You can listen to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik from Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. You can also follow Political Misfits on Twitter at Sputnik Misfits. It is a great, great show. Michelle and Bob are holding it down exceptionally well. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukeman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to open our phone lines up again for the next half hour. We're having a conversation, and we could be having a conversation with you, too, taking calls. Tim, if you wanted to call back in to follow up. Louise, if you're listening, if you'd like to call back in, we'll take you. Anybody who wants to call in, now is the time. 202-521-1320. Jamarl, you and I have at least two disagreements we could get back into. And I'm down to do that if you want to, or we can change topics. Any preference here?
Oh, I have no feelings per se on any of it. Go for it.
All right. Let's talk about the inflation thing again for a second. I guess the point that I was making, it does have to do with inflation. Here's the thing, then. Just to be clear, for folks who are just coming in, at the opening of the show, I believe it was, maybe it was at the beginning of the 8 o'clock hour, actually, Jamarl and I had a back and forth. We were talking about the stimulus payments, and I was saying effectively, I think there should be more means adjustment going on. People who don't actually need the money should get less of it, and the people who really need the money should get more of it. I didn't bring this argument back up then, but it's kind of an obvious one. It's just more politically feasible. It is easier to push for it politically if the dollar amount stays the same, but if it's targeted a bit more. Now, there's going to be some complications in terms of how you're targeting it. Right now, of course, it's $75,000. Below which you get the full payment. Then I think it phases out up to about $100,000, and then above that you don't get the stimulus payment. So that's some means adjustment going on, but that still leaves like a substantial chunk of people who get the money and then who save it, who put it into their bank account. And then where we got off into a tangent, if I remember correctly, was on the topic of inflation. Like whether having that money in your bank account, and moreover, whether spending that money from your bank account eventually will lead to inflation. And that was the second one was actually the case that I was making. I wasn't saying that simply having more money in your account, if everybody has more money in their bank accounts, that itself will lead to inflation, because, there's no velocity of money. If it's just sitting there, it's sitting there and it's not getting thrown out into the marketplace where it's going to sort of compete away the goods that are available in the marketplace. But it's not about it sitting in your bank account fundamentally. You have money in savings so that at some point you'll be able to spend them. And if everybody's stockpiling more and more money in their savings so that at some point they'll be able to spend them, and if that money is effectively created and not taken away, then as far as I can tell, that does lead to inflation in the long run. When you start spending it, which pretty much invariably people will do when you get into another downturn, then you will then have inflation. You'll then have all that money accelerating through the marketplace. You'll have the velocity of money, and that will lead to inflation. Just to clarify, that was my take on that. Jamarl, does that make sense? What do you disagree with there?
It does not entirely. I got to be honest. I don't understand what you're saying. You have people with trillions of dollars, meaning like just slushing around our system. Romney has what, $250 million himself. Pelosi is what, $200-300 million in the bank, or whatever that money is. You have people with dramatically, ridiculously high incomes in this country. There hasn't been inflation. They've been dumping billions, if not trillions, from the standpoint of the way the Fed has been dumping money into our system. There hasn't been inflation. I get the inflation boogeyman, but if you're talking about just putting money into the hands of people that need it, and those people spend it immediately, well, that's
not what I'm talking about.
Well, I'm making a point that has your higher propensity of inflation than what your previous example you gave. I mean, like,
but that was exactly the opposite of what I was talking about.
How is it
It's
exactly
like literally
the opposite of
I
what
was
you're
saying.
talking about, Shane? You're basically saying that people saving money and then spending the money at some later date is going to cause inflation. You believe that's a straw man also? Or is that an accurate representation of what you're saying?
No, that's not a straw man, but that's not what I was. You were responding to. I was saying the exact opposite. If you give a bunch of people money who need it, and then they spend it, then not only is that a moral good because they were deprived of the work, but they need the money. And no, then that's completely fine. But if you give people a bunch of money and then they save that money, then you're putting more money out there. It's not going to get immediately taxed away. It's going to sit there. They're going to stockpile it, and then they're going to spend it. And as far as I can tell, then it won't get taxed away. That's not gonna happen. Then.
When do you think they're going to spend it?
When they want to, possibly in another downturn, but just later on. That's the thing.
Okay, and the later on downturn is at some point going to cause inflation.
Yes, because there's a lot more money sitting in the marketplace at that point. There's effectively, in terms of like physics, if you look at it as a system, there is a lot of potential energy set up. There's a lot of potential money in the system.
But there's not a lot of potential energy saved up right now.
No, for the most part, no. What you have is a lot of people who have their money thrown into the marketplace, into investments, not just sitting in a bank account ready to liquidate and then throw back into the marketplace. Well, the argument you were making is on point. I agree with that. There's in some sense too much money sitting around right now. But as far as I can tell, the reason that it's not inflating our economy, the reason that it's not inflating the dollar specifically, is not just that we're the reserve currency for the world, but that money is in this sort of pyramid scheme-esque stock market growth system. And that's not where most of the people who we're talking about would be sitting their money in. And here's the thing. If they decide to withdraw it in one of those peak periods, then you'd get hyperinflation. You'd get a run on the banks, like you saw during the Great Depression, because everybody would be trying to liquidate their money either from the stock market or from insolvent banks.
Okay. Yeah,
that seems like it would happen.
I don't quite understand this one. So I'm just going to leave that as unclear. But we do have callers. We have Shelly is back. Oh, Shelly from Michigan. Shelly, what's going on?
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Doing all right, Shelly. So what's up? What's the topic for today?
Well, it's to touch on the last caller that called talking about Mike Gravel's
yes.
book that came out?
Oh, go for it.
I recently, at the beginning of the year, I started a petition to gain support for that with everything that's been going on. And I just wanted to bring that up and see what you guys thought of that.
I didn't hear
What
the
is
last
it?
part,
To be
Shelley.
clear,
Yeah, said it one more time. Unless you heard it, Shane.
You might have cut out for a sec. No, Shelley, it sounds like you were referencing a book that Mike Gravel wrote that an earlier caller, that Brave, I think it was mentioning.
Yeah.
Can you just say again, what was it that you were supporting?
So the book's called The Failure of Representative Government and the Solution, and the two pieces of legislation are the Citizens Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, along with the Citizens Legislative Procedures Act, which once those gain enough support, and we'd be able to hold like a national vote, and if the national vote was to pass in favor of that, all legislation that would go through that process would take less than a year to be enacted into law. And so my thought was, if I was to start a petition, which I did, to show that there's enough support, then maybe, that could actually happen one day.
Interesting. Can you give us? I kind of want to look back into this. Can you give us a couple of details here? What is the amendment? What is the Citizens Amendment to the United States that you're talking about? And then what is the Citizens Legislative Procedure? What do those look like?
So the Citizens Amendment basically just lays out that the citizens have the right to do this the same way that the Constitution was amended from the Articles of Confederation. And all it does is bring the people as a whole into like the legislative process so they could act as lawmakers on a national level. And
I see. Okay, wait. So I just want to pause here for a second. I'm reading through the amendment right now, and it fits what you're saying. But to give it a little bit more detail, it would create a legislature of the people, quote unquote. It would effectively create an independent legislative body that operates. I mean, this is just a first look, something like direct democracy. Is that broadly right?
Correct. Yes. The Citizens Legislative Procedure Act is basically, it lays out the procedures and policies of how to do all that. And I mean, a lot of people are calling for like violence and blah, 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 and anarchy and fascism and all that. It has policies and procedures to avoid violence and avoid anarchy and all of that. It's just, you have a goal to get legislation done, you get it done, and you move on. Just like that.
Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate the call. Yeah, I'm not against that. I think what it recognizes is that a lot of the qualms and the problems and the agitation that we have in our society is directly related to policies that we pass or don't pass. And when you see governments that collapse, oftentimes it's because they can't either get the reforms out or they're so tone deaf they don't even try. And so it sounds like what Ravel is saying is that basically the American public knows what it wants and give it to it. If that's from the standpoint of healthcare, if that's from the standpoint of ensuring people when they get older they can have a decent life, do it. That's what it sounds like the point of this is, that the people who are pushing for violence, or the people who have gotten to the point that says the political system is so intransigent that it just doesn't work, instead of getting to the point where the individual wants to burn it all down, I think Mike's point is there's a political solution to this if we're willing to take it. And that's what it sounds like this is. What do you think about it, Shane? Is this adequate for reform, or too little too late, or the solution is so drastic that almost anything is possible if the solution could come about, if that makes sense? What do you think about it?
I'll be honest. I could see it. I would need to think about it more. In a broad sense, I'm just kind of concerned with the state of democracy as a whole because things are so heavily propagandized. And this wouldn't solve what I see as like the deeper problem with democracy, which is that, corporations and governments each have their own incentives to lie to the public about different things and to work together to do so. And so if you have direct democracy, what you might get is just everybody's attention increasingly being leveraged to try to get them to vote for certain things. And the fact that the democracy is more direct does not mean that it's acting more in the interest of the people who are doing the voting. Like, I don't see as far as I can tell, when we first started to have conversations about democracy, which arguably it's a primordial form of government, so it's a little bit off base to even say that we started to have conversations. But when we started to have conversations again about it during like the 17th and 18th centuries, and a bit before, a bit after, of course, in different cases, I don't think we ever really addressed this point, which is not just demagoguery, not just individual leaders trying to rally the emotions of people, but this sort of broad base. We didn't have the idea of propaganda, a broad base, practically algorithmic control of what people think. And that itself is a deep, deep, deep flaw in the nature of democracy when you've risen past a level of a certain level of technology. But that's not responding directly to the idea. As far as it goes, I think it's interesting. And I like Mike Gravel.
Well, let me ask you this. California, for example, like where California is considered a blue state, but they can't pass Medicare for all, they can't get some of the other lefty stuff, and the question becomes why. Do you think that introducing the power of corporations for advertisement and everything else nullifies the ideas of democracy on some level?
I don't know. And it depends on what you mean by nullifies. I don't think that ideas like democracy can be nullified so much as they fit into a conversation that humanity is having with itself, as things change, as our technological capabilities change, as our definitions of our natures change, all that stuff. I think it makes a certain kind of democracy a lot harder. And that's why broadly I'm opposed to the role of corporate money in politics, though.
That makes sense. And by nullify, I just mean by them able to give their own point of view, by them able to drop all sorts of money, like the marijuana legislation.
Yeah.
Where they put all of this money into saying, you don't want this. This is a horrible idea. This is not that good for you. And the public voted no on it. It's like, what? How did you vote no on that? But that's what it sounds like. It sounds like the money is so dominant in the conversation that the conversation gets to some degree warped by the side with the cash that can scream out their point and their political opinion. Let's do this. Let's take a break. We'll come back. I suppose we're just staying with the rap. You guys are listening to Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're taking calls, 202-521-1320. Tim from Myrtle Beach. Tim, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, I just got a question. Was I the Tim you were referring to when you said that you guys couldn't get to my call?
Yeah, you called in. You called in at the end of the hour. No fault of your own. We've been talking for a while, I think, with Brave. And then, I didn't really respond to you. And I don't think you got a chance to make your point either.
Yeah, well, see, my point is I just got like three things to say. For one, I called in back when your dad and Garland were doing the show, and I talked about how this lockdown thing and this coronavirus reminded me a lot of V for Vendetta. If you all ever seen that movie, it's awesome. Check it out. And in the same vein as Brave from Atlanta, there is rage that needs to be felt with the people. I don't know if y'all ever heard of a little band called Rage Against the Machines, but back in the 90s, they were speaking about things that are still going on today and past issues. It is fantastic. I'd recommend their 1999 album either way. Also, I think that there's two things that America needs to feel. Rage being one of them, and shame, like to have let our country get to this point? Like, how do you watch politicians day after day, usurp power from the people in their name and not feel like shameful about what is going on in your own country and a lot about what's going on in your own name? And so I think a lot of people need to feel that and, get rage, do something about it. Like, you don't need to be violent. I don't believe in the violence of things, but at the same time, anger is a secondary emotion, and that emotion stems from the feeling of loss or hurt, like I've lost power or something like that. So
frustration, Tim. I think what you're looking for is frustration. This inability of something to work in the way that it's supposed to work, and that inability, that friction, generates a certain degree of anger and hostility. I would imagine the entire point is that the anger and hostility is used as motivation to change whatever it is that's creating the issue. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate the call. Look, I agree, that the anger thing is a part of the political process. I mean, rage and shame, the only thing I would add is empathy. Because keep in mind, you could turn on Fox News and watch Lou Dobbs, and he would be very rageful. He would be very angry. And he would also use this argument about shame and everything else, but he would make this argument entirely from a right-wing perspective. I would add empathy to it. This thought that pain connects us. The fact that somebody is ill understands what it means for another individual to be ill. And regardless of the other things that are disconnecting in these kind of variations in regards to the people, that pain, that difficulty is a connecting element in regards to the human condition. I think empathy needs to be added to it. Look, my only concern about the anger and the hostility stuff, I think it's warranted. It's not that. Sometimes I think it gets misplaced. And I do agree with it when it can be targeted and it can be used and wielded in a way that tries to change your scenario. So, yeah, I agree with the premise, like 99.5% of the premise of what people are saying on this very specific point. I think I agree with it. There's just an aspect of it that I don't agree with because I was raised a particular way. Where I do think how you talk to people matters. I do think, just from playing chess, what you say, how you say it, the tone that you say, all of those things go into your effectiveness as a communicator. And when you're in a situation where you're trying to convince and trying to get people to come across to your point, I think part of the politics and part of the strategy is how the message is cut also. Shane, what do you think? We have one more call, I think, Joe, but do you disagree with that? That the politics of something also includes how it's cut to try to get it across to whoever, either that person is an ally or, for that matter, even if the person is an enemy.
I want to respond. I think that who you're responding to and how you're responding matters deeply. And I think that one of the problems with anger as a directive emotion is that it's very easy to be driven by it, to respond to people who aren't actually at fault and who hurting won't help you in any way. In other words, if I'm justifiably angry about something, I can take that out on plenty of people without justification and do damage to myself, do damage to my community, etc., and do no good. Not saying that that's an inevitability. Like all emotions, it has its place in our repertoire. But if I were going to feel any emotion with some justification, what I would want to feel is justified hope. What I would want to feel is a sense of justified conviction or commitment. Like there's plenty of justification to feel anger, and there are in many cases justifications for feeling shame. But if there's an emotion that I really wish we could feel deeply and honestly, it would be something like hope or conviction, or the two of those together. Because if you feel it with justification, and it's almost a cheat, then you have a reason for feeling it. There is some way out of this problem. But I mean, another way of looking at this, and we should go to the calls. Another way of looking at this is maybe focusing on getting people to feel a certain way is itself a kind of subtle propaganda. And instead, what we should focus on are specific tactical solutions to specific problems and a larger strategy that actually makes sense. Because then you'll have a good reason to feel certain ways, a good reason to feel hopeful, a good reason to use your anger. Not saying that's, not really trying to push back on you in any serious sense, Tim, but it's just a slight change in perspective. Jamarl, we got a caller on, but
no, let's go to another caller. I gave my point of view. I agree with you. I mean, I like the hope thing, and I like the because there's something to be said that if your society does have this sense of commitment and this sense of hope, then it's about something. There's a reality there, especially if it's legitimate hope. I think all of this stuff falls into play. I don't think you can disambiguate any of this stuff, like, to use your word, Shane. Like, I do think you need empathy. I do think you need hope. I do think you need commitment. I think all of those things. When you're building the rocket program, that's commitment. That's hope. That's all, all of this stuff wrapped up into one. Joe from Albany, New York. Joe, what's going on?
Hi, good morning, guys. Yeah, I had a question. I had 3 questions. So the first one, I just want to run through with is, what about putting a tax on the purchase of per stock? I feel like if there was a tax on it, there would be less likelihood that someone would want to buy back their stocks to the point that they're just hoarding money. Second, want to know what your thoughts were on trying to get the working class to, come together and actually do this together, because the racism and all the different ideologies that doesn't do us any good is what's continuously is crushing the working class agenda, as far as getting us up there and being able to protest as a mass. And then the last thing is, what are your thoughts on 4 of the squad members being able to get onto the committee of oversight? And that's pretty much all I had asked.
Jamarl, I'm gonna
squad oversight.
Maybe we can work in reverse. I'm curious. Yeah, go for it.
No. Go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say maybe we can start with his third comment, kind of working in reverse, and I wanted to hear your take on that.
Yeah, the squad oversight. So the AOC talked about that this morning, and she basically made the point that she's a formal member of the oversight committee now, whereas beforehand she could have been kicked off or something. It's like the scale or the I need to find the tweet that she was talking about this in, but basically she's now one of the primary members of that, where she can't just be kicked off, whereas beforehand she could have been apparently booted from it. And they put Cori Bush also on that oversight committee. Look, I don't have an issue with these guys being on the oversight committee. I think my issue, and a lot of people who were pushing the force the vote stuff, was just stand for something. And stand for it in a way that goes beyond just the verbal and the talking about it. Actually draw a line in the sand. I think that's where they were coming from. And so the committee seats, yeah, they're fine. I don't have any issue with that. I just don't know if people have pushed the squad because of incrementalism, and whether this will be considered incrementalism by the group. I consider it that way, and so it's very possible that the other part of the group also considers it that way. But what do you think, Shane? We started the last one. The working class working together, of course, yes, and the persistence or stocks. They do tax stocks, if I'm not mistaken. It's just that they're taxed less. It's like Mitt Romney was 14% or something like that, as opposed to wages that are 35%. It's like a double the amount that they tax wages. But what do you think, Shane?
Well, yeah. So you have income tax, and you have short-term capital gains, long-term capital gains. Short-term capital gains, basically, if you buy a stock and then sell it in, I think it's less than a year, then your tax rate is, I think, basically the same thing as income tax. If you buy a stock and then you sit on it, you just hold it, then long-term capital gains, it's much lower. It's like 0% below certain levels of income, and then it's even when it jumps up to 10, 15% or whatever, it's significantly lower than if you were making a comparable amount of money from a normal W-2 type of job. That's the brief thing in there. I think, Joe, you were talking about taxes on buying stocks. I just don't see the system going for that, because our economy is effectively synonymous with our stock market. It's sort of seen as such by the Fed and by many sectors of our government, as far as I can tell. And so making it more difficult for people to participate in that economy, quote unquote, for people to participate in the stock market by buying stocks and by selling them, they're just not going to go for it. And I don't know that we should. I think that there are deeper problems. I get where you're going. With the working class, it would be great if the working class got together again. Unions have been in a long-term decline. But two ways to push back on this. For one thing, you started it off with racism. How do you work with the working class if some members of the working class, like some members of all of humanity, are racist, sexist, homophobic? Like, it seems like identity politics has supplanted class reductionism, or whatever pejorative you want to use for it. Identity politics has supplanted a focus on mobilizing the working class as an economic class, which of course they are fundamentally, because there are some deep disagreements there, and you've got to prioritize them. And this comes back to the conversation about language and economics and all this stuff. Are you going to focus on the real underlying reality, or the words, the symbols, the verbal institutions we use to summarize these things? Anyway, topics for another day. Signing off. We'll be back tomorrow, folks. Thank you for listening. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Another one in the record books, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us again. I have some medical stuff I need to attend to today, so you guys may or may not see me. It depends on how I feel afterwards. Rev Barker, it would be great if you guys get Richard Medhurst. Now, that's one of the gentlemen, if I'm not mistaken, I was following for Julian Assange, if I'm not mistaken. Look, I agree with Alexander McCarris on the Assange thing. I think I don't know if they were going to ever let Assange out, but I get his logic. He's basically saying, if you're saying that the man is ill, that you can't send him into a prison, then shouldn't you let him go? I also get his point that the moment that Mexico says, hey, we're here, we'll take him in, then the judge looks at that with somewhat of a particular eye. But he's ultimately right. Talking about Alexander McCarris. After spending 7 years stuck in an embassy, and then get dragged out of that embassy and thrown into a jail cell, speaking literally, and you accept that there's certain mental issues that are associated with this. But then to say, well, Belmarsh prison is far, far better than American prisons, and so he's not going to try to kill himself here. He's only going to try to kill himself there. And I don't want the opportunity for this man who's ill, sick, who I've called mentally ill, to basically abscond to Mexico because he has so many resources and people to help him in that pursuit. If you're going to let the guy go, let the guy go, especially under this scenario. If you're going to say that American jails are so particularly uniquely bad, then you can't send them to them, then what are you talking about for later? Somebody else is going to apparently look at the judgment, and do you believe that the person is going to give the judgment to send them there? And if so, meaning my concerning with the judge's wording on this, and the reason why I'm so focused on the wording, is because sometimes legal stuff or legalese can be very specific. And the judge who's coming behind him, who's going to make the determination on whether or not to sustain this appeal, or whether or not to create another trial that Assange may have to endure and go through, well, they may be looking at the literal wording that the judge is using to make the determination on whether to either keep him there or whether they even do another trial. My focus on it was because it was so odd and weird that she would use that as a reasoning and justification. And I was just curious on whether that has some later specific or some later significance that we may not necessarily know about, that we might find about when we hit our head on with the next judge. But we'll see. Alexander's always on point, so he's always good. Also, the protests are we're in Maryland. I mean, we're about an hour away. I take about 45 minutes to get on the metro to go to work, to get to D.C. Bob lives in the area, and so Bob has been going to a lot of these protests, just in general, whether he was on the show or not. Bob frequented the protests. He's heavy on that. And so him giving this kind of rundown on what's taking place is in and of itself phenomenal. So no, it was a good show today. I am happy for Assange, but that happy is borders around it. I want to make sure he gets out, and I want to make sure it's not this hooray, she's not going to extradite, but some weird quirk that keeps him there. So it's a reserved celebration, let's put it that way. I want to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You guys may or may not see me. I have a doctor's visit today, unfortunately, and I have another one tomorrow, which is why you guys haven't been seeing me for this week. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all. Oh, by the way, make sure you hit the subscribe button. YouTube does weird stuff sometimes. I just want to make sure you're registered. Thanks, everyone. All right, wait, I didn't see these. So, Intermediary Fossil, thank you, Intermediary Fossil. Trudy, turns out I'm nuts. First show you did with Tim Black was 3 years ago. I could have swore you were on there when New York was stolen from Bernie in 2016. I don't, no. I wasn't on the Tim Black show when it was stolen by Bernie. But for some reason, I do have this memory of being on. Yeah, I don't remember the Trudy. I don't think I was on in 2016 like that. I mean, I'd started my show after Sanders, I think. And I remember watching the Young Turks when New York was stolen from Sanders. So I hadn't started my show yet. But you're not nuts, Trudy. Thank you. I appreciate it. It took me a while to work that out myself, so you're not nuts. Definitely not. And it's my show, and it took me a while to work it out. Guys, look, thank you. All of you. I do appreciate it. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. And I'm going to say subscribe. Trudy, God, man, that is a rough memory. Do you remember, because for New York, we thought Sanders was potentially going to take New York. This was when Jimmy Dore was still on the Young Turks. And they were like, whisper a dream, whisper a dream, whisper a dream. If Bernie Sanders could take New York, it invigorates his campaign. The media narrative changes almost overnight. And the world's great. What ended up happening was Sanders lost New York. They called it in like 5 minutes. And at that point, there was this great letdown. This great letdown. Right here. Gerald Brown. At least the super chat didn't drop the comment like it happened on Tim Black last night. So Google has changed their format. In one sense, they would have it where the super chats would come up. Yes. In another sense, they would go away after a while. And so on another screen, you'd have to go to this other screen that gives you a listing of all of the super chats and everything else. My wife often just kind of reads it on his cell phone when she's here. So, whisper a dream, God no. Whisper a dream. Someday someone will give us 20 million and we will cash Guard. Well, you know, the whisper a dream stuff was what Dore was saying. I think they even had t-shirts. Whisper a dream, whisper a dream. Steve Trosak, the DNC should be in jail. Well, the DNC does what the public and other Democrats allow them to do. There was a woman who put on my Twitter account the other day, Kamala Harris. I wrote Kamala Harris after she said pass the $2,000. Kamala Harris went and properly voted to get rid of the $2,000 and exceed the vote to McConnell. Somebody wrote she didn't have a choice. If she didn't do it, people wouldn't get money. Now think about what's being said for the moment. Kamala Harris, I've just showed you a remarkable case of hypocrisy. Remarkable case. Now, Chuck Schumer, same thing. Chuck Schumer was like, give the $2,000 on Twitter at the exact moment that Chuck Schumer was voting down the $2,000. They could have stood there like a wall of China or something like that. They chose not to. They folded and they broke. They basically collapsed. The only way and the only reason they would do that is because the public deems it acceptable for them to do that. Mainly their supporters. Meaning, if you always have a reporter or a supporter somewhere that's willing to give an excuse for your behavior, then your behavior is probably going to continue. Whether that's behaving poorly, or whether that's failing miserably, whether that's folding the moment that any little amount of pressure is put towards you. I'm making the point that that's basically what they do. The Democratic Party does what it does because its supporters allow them to behave that way. If the supporters were more rigid, if the supporters were more aggressive, whatever I think about Dore going after, let's say, AOC or whatever else, I do think that if more of the supporters were like that, they would behave less cowardly. They would be less willing to bend over. They would be less likely to fold as opposed to defending and fighting for the American public on items like this. yeah, the public should feel some kind of way about it. The public should be angry about the way they respond, the way they would easily and allow. Like, for example, the $2,000 thing. Does the American public want $2,000? Yes. Even if you have $2,000 in the bank, would that person want $2,000? Yes. Yes. Bad days happen. If those people want the $2,000, would they be more or less likely to vote for you if you are offering them $2,000? Clearly more likely. Biden didn't believe that people should get it. He backed it. The Republicans damn sure didn't believe people should get it. Loeffler and Perdue whispered over the course of the last week, even though they weren't backing the $2,000 at any particular point in time. I'm making a point that the offering of it in and of itself was sufficient to try to get people to back them. They understood that providing for the public's welfare, whether it's the $2,000, whether it's the Medicare for all, whether it's some other kind of legislation, that those things entice the public every bit as much as plutocrats are enticed by tax cuts, or plutocrats are enticed by givebacks that are taken. Who knew that if you back the interests of the public, that the public will be more likely to back your interests? That's what's being shown here. And that's the power, honestly, of even the Medicare for all debate. You should want to have that fight in Congress about Medicare for all, especially in the middle of a pandemic, especially when the American public backs your position. The trick is that internal politics is not going to get you what you want when the brain trust of the Democratic Party is fundamentally against it. House, Senate, presidency. Your best interest and your best chance is fought in the public. If you're wondering why Medicare for all and why the force the vote should have went through, why they should have pushed for it, despite the consequences in regards to committee seats or anything else, it had to do with that. You're in the middle of a pandemic. The American public can observe and see what's happening. The money that is being held up and the $2,000 has just drawn a red circle around the debate that's taking place. The mainstream media may come out and say, hey, the American public doesn't need it. I would wager to you that the American public is sitting there saying, go fuck yourself. And when you get into these other cases of people who are saying, yeah, I want the $2,000, I want the $2,000, having to go on television and argue the ridiculous position that the American public in no way wants the $2,000 or can't use it is absurd. It's absurd. You want to have the force to vote conversation for the same reason you want to have a conversation on the $2,000. Not only do you draw a circle around it because of the scenario that is taking place in the American public right now, where people are falling off of a cliff financially. Some of us are. But you want to have to fight. And people see you fighting hard for their best interest medically. 20 million people are infected with COVID-19. Those are bills. Those are things that people have to pay. Some of those people, many of those people, months out, still has medical issues associated with COVID-19, still have problems associated with that particular virus. Do you believe that their income suffered? Do you believe that their physical health suffered? What about the people around them? What about the family members? What about the ones that lost their jobs? When Obamacare was signed, you still had 25, give or take, million people that didn't have health insurance. Well, what about now? Well, you had all of these people that lost their jobs. You had 15 million more people that basically lost their health care. That's not even including the kids of the various parents who lost their job and then lost their health care in association with it. So, Joe Biden, king of blacks, comes out. What should he do? What should the American public expect him to do? What should the African American population that voted for him to the tune of like 90% expect of Joe Biden in this situation? Well, what they expect of him should be clear. We need Medicare for all. We need Medicare for all, at the very least for everyone with COVID. We need the elimination of student debt, even if it's just the centrist $50,000 off the student debt. That still would be a remarkable benefit to people at the bottom end of the income scale. Black, white, gay, straight, whatever. I'm making the point that having all access, you have all sorts of capabilities to do things that will be in the best interest of the public and to ensure that you could potentially win. The downside to winning the Senate is expectation, and whether or not you're going to live up to that expectation, because at this point you have zero excuses. Much of the stuff that I've talked about, you can even do it by yourself, meaning Joe Biden as president in and of himself has the power to get rid of student loans. Donald Trump, the legislation Donald Trump used to postpone it, it's the same legislation or the same power that allows the president to get rid of the legislation or get rid of the student loan debt. Whether he uses it or not is something else. This is a double-edged sword. Mark my word. I said Biden would win. I was right. I said Democrats would keep the House. I was right. I said Democrats would take the Senate. It looks like I was right. When they take the Senate, Sanders is going to get into a leadership position. I think it was Health and Human Services, but I could be wrong. I forget the exact name of the department that he's going to head. What is going to be the determining factor, however, is whether or not they continue, or whether or not they take a course that tries to help and assist an American public that have been belabored or that have been beaten down by this economic system and the way that this system runs. Is he going to be a benefit to the American public or not? Is he going to be a benefit to the people that got him in office or not? And I got to be honest, based on the people Biden are putting in the various positions, these war hawks, these militarists, these Wall Street people, it doesn't seem like it at all. But we'll see. You never know. He may end up throwing stuff back just out of some sense of precaution. But at this moment, it does not look like Joe Biden cares one iota about that. We'll see, though. If he takes the Senate, all excuses that Joe Biden was going to be able to lean on Mitch McConnell, oh, I would have done this if it wasn't for Mitch, those will be out the window. We'll see. I am uber curious. In fact, I wanted them to get the House and the Senate because I didn't want them to have any excuses. Meaning I don't want them to end the term and be like, oh, those Republicans. What Joe Biden should do right now is get rid of the filibuster in the Senate and push through whatever judges that he wants. He should push through whatever legislation that he wants. He should go gangbusters. That's what he should do. We're in a pandemic. This is something on the level of a Great Depression many times over. This would be the time to go big or go home. This is the time where people determine what they actually believe in. And honestly, the environment, the pandemic, gives clout. Understand what I am saying. If Joe Biden came out tomorrow and said, you know what, 20 million people are infected with this virus. We're going to push through a Medicare for all plan because, God damn it, that's what we need. We got to deal with this. We can't just let this fall to the side. He could do that. And the pandemic itself gives just cause for him to do that. I hope you understand what I mean by this. You can't necessarily get everything you want to accomplish at every particular time. It does take seeding the ground and seeding this environment. But sometimes the environment gets seeded in and of itself because of how dramatic the issue is. You have the world economy fall off its axis during the Great Depression. This allows FDR to push through all of these policies that under normal circumstances would have been unheard of, especially something like Social Security. I'm saying that the pandemic, the job loss, all of those things allow the exact same scenario to take place, especially if you had an American public that was motivated, that was pissed off, and that was standing outside pushing. Right now, the COVID virus has created a difficult time in regards to doing this kind of push and so forth. But I am making the point that this provides an amazing opportunity. The sad part is, what would Sanders do in this moment as opposed to Biden if it was Sanders as president-elect as opposed to Biden? And that's the greatest disappointment, probably, of 2020 was probably the Medicare for All thing with that much support not coming over the finish line. But nevertheless, Joe Biden seems to have been given the House and the Senate. And the question is, what does he do with it? I got to be honest, my expectations are not all that high. And because my expectations aren't that high, in juxtaposed against the problem it's very possible that Biden, who is not looking for anything extravagant or anything big, might actually be beat over the head because he doesn't do those things. Meaning, if you're not going to use the House and the Senate that was bestowed upon you by the American public, if you're not going to run out and scream mandate the moment that you win, I don't care if it's by one vote, you go out and scream mandate, mandate. You do it because you want to get shit done. You don't do it when you just look at the presidency as just a career advancement or just a job. We don't want people who want the president for a job. We have all sorts of things that need to get done. And the goal should be to get shit done. It's unfortunate that Biden has won the presidency because at this point it seems like a House and a Representatives or a House of Representatives and a Senate is basically wasted on him. And I do think that a tone-deaf Democratic Party would have dramatic consequences for us later on when you get a Republican that is basically Donald Trump, that is far brighter, with a far better, let's say, penchant for using the political device to his ends, not in our own. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.